The Mysterious Affair at Styles, by Agatha Christie. In the interval before the inquest, Poirot was unfailing in his activity. Twice he was closeted with Mr. Wells. He also took long walks into the country. I rather resented his not taking me into his confidence, the more so as I could not in the least guess what he was driving at. It occurred to me that he might have been making inquiries at Rakes's farm. So, finding him out when I called at Leastways Cottage on Wednesday evening, I walked over there by the fields, hoping to meet him. But there was no sign of him, and I hesitated to go right up to the farm itself. As I walked away, I met an aged rustic who leered at me cunningly. "You am from the Hall, bain't you?" he asked. "Yes. I'm looking for a friend of mine whom I thought might have walked this way. A little chap, as waves his hands when he talks? One of them Belgies from the village?" "Yes," I said eagerly. "He has been here, then?" "Oh, he's been here right enough. More'n once, too." "Friend of yours, is he?" "You gentlemen from the Hall. You am a pretty lot." And he leered more jocosely than ever. "Why, do the gentlemen from the Hall come here often?" I asked as carelessly as I could. He winked at me knowingly. "One does, mister. Naming no names, mind. And a very liberal gentleman, too." "Oh, thank you, sir, I'm sure." I walked on sharply. Evelyn Howard had been right then, and I experienced a sharp twinge of disgust as I thought of Alfred Inglethorpe's liberality with another woman's money. Had that piquant gypsy face been at the bottom of the crime? Or was it the baser mainspring of money? Probably a judicious mixture of both. On one point, Poirot seemed to have a curious obsession. He once or twice observed to me that he thought Dorcas must have made an error in fixing the time of the quarrel. He suggested to her repeatedly that it was 4:30 and not 4 o'clock when she had heard the voices. But Dorcas was unshaken. Quite an hour, or even more, had elapsed between the time when she had heard the voices and 5 o'clock, when she had taken tea to her mistress. The inquest was held on Friday at the Stylites Arms in the village. Poirot and I sat together, not being required to give evidence. The preliminaries were gone through. The jury viewed the body, and John Cavendish gave evidence of identification. Further questioned. He described his awakening in the early hours of the morning and the circumstances of his mother's death. The medical evidence was next taken. There was a breathless hush, and every eye was fixed on the famous London specialist, who was known to be one of the greatest authorities of the day on the subject of toxicology. In a few brief words, he summed up the result of the postmortem. Shorn of its medical phraseology and technicalities, it amounted to the fact that Mrs. Inglethorpe had met her death as the result of strychnine poisoning. Judging from the quantity recovered, she must have taken not less than 3/4 of a grain of strychnine, but probably 1 grain or slightly over. "Is it possible that she could have swallowed the poison by accident?" asked the coroner. "I should consider it very unlikely. Strychnine is not used for domestic purposes, as some poisons are, and there are restrictions placed on its sale." "Does anything in your examination lead you to determine how the poison was administered?" "No. You arrived at Styles before Dr. Wilkins, I believe?" "That is so. The motor met me just outside the lodge gates, and I hurried there as fast as I could." "Will you relate to us exactly what happened next?" "I entered Mrs. Inglethorpe's room. She was at that moment in a typical tetanic convulsion. She turned toward me and gasped out, 'Alfred, Alfred.' Could the strychnine have been administered in Mrs. Inglethorpe's after-dinner coffee which was taken to her by her husband? Possibly, but strychnine is a fairly rapid drug in its action. The symptoms appear from 1 to 2 hours after it has been swallowed. It is retarded under certain conditions, none of which, however, appear to have been present in this case. I presume Mrs. Inglethorpe took the coffee after dinner about 8 o'clock, whereas the symptoms did not manifest themselves until the early hours of the morning, which, on the face of it, points to the drug having been taken much later in the evening. Mrs. Inglethorpe was in the habit of drinking a cup of cocoa in the middle of the night. Could the strychnine have been administered in that? No, I myself took a sample of the cocoa remaining in the saucepan and had it analyzed. There was no strychnine present. I heard Poirot chuckle softly beside me. "How did you know?" I whispered. "Listen. I should say," the doctor was continuing, "that I would have been considerably surprised at any other result." "Why?" "Simply because strychnine has an unusually bitter taste. It can be detected in a solution of 1 in 70,000, and can only be disguised by some strongly flavored substance. Cocoa would be quite powerless to mask it." One of the jury wanted to know if the same objection applied to coffee. "No. Coffee has a bitter taste of its own which would probably cover the taste of strychnine." "Then you consider it more likely that the drug was administered in the coffee, but that for some unknown reason its action was delayed?" "Yes, but the cup being completely smashed, There's no possibility of analyzing its contents. This concluded Dr. Bauerstein's evidence. Dr. Wilkins corroborated it on all points. Sounded as to the possibility of suicide, he repudiated it utterly. The deceased, he said, suffered from a weak heart, but otherwise enjoyed perfect health, and was of a cheerful and well-balanced disposition. She would be one of the last people to take her own life. Lawrence Cavendish was next called. His evidence was quite unimportant, being a mere repetition of that of his brother. Just as he was about to step down, he paused, and said rather hesitatingly, "I should like to make a suggestion, if I may." He glanced deprecatingly at the coroner, who replied briskly, "Certainly, Mr. Cavendish. We are here to arrive at the truth of this matter, and welcome anything that may lead to further elucidation." "It is just an idea of mine," explained Lawrence. "Of course I may be quite wrong, but it still seems to me that my mother's death might be accounted for by natural means." "How do you make that out, Mr. Cavendish?" "My mother, at the time of her death, and for some time before it, was taking a tonic containing strychnine." "Ah," said the coroner. The jury looked up interested. "I believe," continued Lawrence, "that there have been cases where the cumulative effect of a drug, administered for some time, has ended by causing death. Also, is it not possible that she may have taken an overdose of her medicine by accident? This is the first we have heard of the deceased taking strychnine at the time of her death." "We are much obliged to you, Mr. Cavendish." Dr. Wilkins was recalled and ridiculed the idea. "What Mr. Cavendish suggests is quite impossible. Any doctor would tell you the same. Strychnine is, in a certain sense, a cumulative poison, but it would be quite impossible for it to result in sudden death in this way. There would have to be a long period of chronic symptoms which would at once have attracted my attention. The whole thing is absurd. And the second suggestion, that Mrs. Inglethorpe may have inadvertently taken an overdose, 3 or even 4 doses, would not have resulted in death. Mrs. Inglethorpe always had an extra large amount of medicine made up at a time, as she dealt with Coots, the cash chemist in Tadminster. She would have had to take very nearly the whole bottle to account for the amount of strychnine found at the postmortem. Then you consider that we may dismiss the tonic as not being in any way instrumental in causing her death? Certainly. The supposition is ridiculous. The same juryman who had interrupted before here suggested that the chemist who made up the medicine might have committed an error. "That, of course, is always possible," replied the doctor. But Dorcas, who was the next witness called, dispelled even that possibility. The medicine had not been newly made up. On the contrary, Mrs. Inglethorpe had taken the last dose on the day of her death. So the question of the tonic was finally abandoned, and the coroner proceeded with his task. Having elicited from Dorcas how she had been awakened by the violent ringing of her mistress's bell, and had subsequently roused the household, he passed to the subject of the quarrel on the preceding afternoon. Dorcas's evidence on this point was substantially what Poirot and I had already heard, so I will not repeat it here. The next witness was Mary Cavendish. She stood very upright and spoke in a low, clear, and perfectly composed voice. In answer to the coroner's question, she told how, her alarm clock having aroused her at 4:30 as usual, she was dressing when she was startled by the sound of something heavy falling. "That would have been the table by the bed," commented the coroner. "I opened my door," continued Mary, "and listened. In a few minutes a bell rang violently. Dorcas came running down and woke my husband, and we all went to my mother-in-law's room, but it was locked." The coroner interrupted her. "I really do not think we need trouble you further on that point. We know all that can be known of the subsequent happenings, but I should be obliged if you would tell us all you overheard of the quarrel the day before." There was a faint insolence in her voice. She raised her hand and adjusted the ruffle of lace at her neck, turning her head a little as she did so. And quite spontaneously the thought flashed across my mind. "She's gaining time. Yes, I understand," continued the coroner deliberately, "that you were sitting reading on the bench just outside the long window of the boudoir. That is so, is it not?" This was news to me, and glancing sideways at Poirot, I fancied that it was news to him as well. There was the faintest pause, the mere hesitation of a moment, before she answered, "Yes, that is so. And the boudoir window was open, was it not?" Surely her face grew a little paler as she answered, "Yes." "Then you cannot have failed to hear the voices inside, especially as they were raised in anger. In fact, they would be more audible where you were than in the hall." "Possibly. Will you repeat to us what you overheard of the quarrel? I really do not remember hearing anything." "Do you mean to say you did not hear voices?" "Oh, yes, I heard the voices, but I did not hear what they said." A faint spot of color came into her cheek. "I am not in the habit of listening to private conversations." The coroner persisted. "And you remember nothing at all?" Nothing, Mrs. Cavendish? Not one stray word or phrase to make you realize that it was a private conversation. She paused and seemed to reflect, still outwardly as calm as ever. Yes, I remember. Mrs. Inglethorpe said something. I do not remember exactly what. About causing scandal between husband and wife. Ah, the coroner leant back satisfied. That corresponds with what Dorcas heard. But excuse me, Mrs. Cavendish. Although you realized it was a private conversation, you did not move away? You remained where you were? I caught the momentary gleam of her tawny eyes as she raised them. I felt certain that at that moment she would willingly have torn the little lawyer, with his insinuations, into pieces. But she replied quietly enough. No, I was very comfortable where I was. I fixed my mind on my book. And that is all you can tell us? That is all. The examination was over, though I doubted if the coroner was entirely satisfied with it. I think he suspected that Mary Cavendish could tell more if she chose. Amy Hill, shop assistant, was next called, and deposed to having sold a wool form on the afternoon of the 17th to William Earle, under gardener at Styles. William Earle and Manning succeeded her, and testified to witnessing a document. Manning fixed the time at about 4:30. William was of the opinion that it was rather earlier. Cynthia Murdoch came next. She had, however, little to tell. She had known nothing of the tragedy, until awakened by Mrs. Cavendish. You did not hear the table fall? No, I was fast asleep. The coroner smiled. A good conscience makes a sound sleeper, he observed. Thank you, Miss Murdoch, that is all. Miss Howard. Miss Howard produced a letter written to her by Mrs. Inglethorpe on the evening of the 17th. Poirot and I had, of course, already seen it. It added nothing to our knowledge of the tragedy. The following is a facsimile. Styles Court, Essex. Handwritten note. July 17th. My dear Evelyn, can we not bury the hatchet? I have found it hard to forgive the things you said against my dear husband, but I am an old woman and very fond of you. Yours affectionately, Emily Inglethorpe. It was handed to the jury, who scrutinized it attentively. I fear it does not help us much, said the coroner with a sigh. There is no mention of any of the events of that afternoon. Plain as a pikestaff to me, said Miss Howard shortly. It shows clearly enough that my poor old friend had just found out she'd been made a fool of. It says nothing of the kind in the letter, the coroner pointed out. No, because Emily never could bear to put herself in the wrong. But I know her. She wanted me back. But she wasn't going to own that I'd been right. She went roundabout. Most people do. Don't believe in it myself. Mr. Wells smiled faintly. So I noticed that several of the jury. Miss Howard was obviously quite a public character. Anyway, all this tomfoolery is a great waste of time, continued the lady, glancing up and down the jury disparagingly. Talk, 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 when all the time we know perfectly well. The coroner interrupted her in an agony of apprehension. Thank you, Miss Howard. That is all. I fancy he breathed a sigh of relief when she complied. Then came the sensation of the day. The coroner called Albert Mace, chemist's assistant. It was our agitated young man of the pale face. In answer to the coroner's questions, he explained that he was a qualified pharmacist, but had only recently come to this particular shop. As the assistant formerly, there had just been called up for the army. These preliminaries completed, the coroner proceeded to business. Mr. Mace, have you lately sold strychnine to any unauthorized person? Yes, sir. When was this? Last Monday night. Monday? Not Tuesday. No, sir, Monday the 16th. Will you tell us to whom you sold it? You could have heard a pin drop. Yes, sir. It was to Mr. Inglethorpe. Every eye turned simultaneously to where Alfred Inglethorpe was sitting, impassive and wooden. He started slightly, as the damning words fell from the young man's lips. I half thought he was going to rise from his chair, but he remained seated, although a remarkably well-acted expression of astonishment rose on his face. You are sure of what you say? Asked the coroner sternly. Quite sure, sir. Are you in the habit of selling strychnine indiscriminately over the counter? The wretched young man wilted visibly under the coroner's frown. Oh, no, sir, of course not. But, seeing it was Mr. Inglethorpe of the Hall, I thought there was no harm in it. He said it was to poison a dog. Inwardly, I sympathized. It was only human nature to endeavor to please the Hall, especially when it might result in custom being transferred from Coots to the local establishment. Is it not customary for anyone purchasing poison to sign a book? Yes, sir, Mr. Inglethorpe did so. Have you got the book here? Yes, sir. It was produced, and with a few words of stern censure, the coroner dismissed the wretched Mr. Mace. Then, amidst a breathless silence, Alfred Inglethorpe was called. Did he realize I wondered how closely the halter was being drawn around his neck? The coroner went straight to the point. On Monday evening last, did you purchase strychnine for the purpose of poisoning a dog? Inglethorpe replied with perfect calmness. No, I did not. There is no dog at Styles except an outdoor sheepdog, which is in perfect health. You deny absolutely having purchased strychnine from Albert Mace on Monday last? I do. Do you also deny this? The coroner handed him the register, in which his signature was inscribed. Certainly I do. The handwriting is quite different from mine. I will show you. He took an old envelope out of his pocket and wrote his name on it, handing it to the jury. It was certainly utterly dissimilar. Then what is your explanation of Mr. Mace's statement? Alfred Inglethorpe replied imperturbably. Mr. Mace must have been mistaken. The coroner hesitated for a moment, and then said, Mr. Inglethorpe, as a mere matter of form, would you mind telling us where you were on the evening of Monday, July 16th? Really, I cannot remember. That is absurd, Mr. Inglethorpe, said the coroner sharply. Think again. Inglethorpe shook his head. I cannot tell you. I have an idea that I was out walking. In what direction? I really can't remember. The coroner's face grew graver. Were you in company with anyone? No. Did you meet anyone on your walk? No. That is a pity, said the coroner dryly. I am to take it then that you declined to say where you were at the time, that Mr. Mace positively recognized you as entering the shop to purchase strychnine? If you like to take it that way, yes. Be careful, Mr. Inglethorpe. Poirot was fidgeting nervously. Saker, he murmured. Does this imbecile of a man want to be arrested? Inglethorpe was indeed creating a bad impression. His futile denials would not have convinced a child. The coroner, however, passed briskly to the next point, and Poirot drew a deep breath of relief. You had a discussion with your wife on Tuesday afternoon? Pardon me, interrupted Alfred Inglethorpe. You have been misinformed. I had no quarrel with my dear wife. The whole story is absolutely untrue. I was absent from the house the entire afternoon. Have you anyone who can testify to that? You have my word, said Inglethorpe haughtily. The coroner did not trouble to reply. There are 2 witnesses who will swear to having heard your disagreement with Mrs. Inglethorpe. Those witnesses were mistaken. I was puzzled. The man spoke with such quiet assurance that I was staggered. I looked at Poirot. There was an expression of exultation on his face which I could not understand. Was he at last convinced of Alfred Inglethorpe's guilt? Mr. Inglethorpe, said the coroner, you have heard your wife's dying words repeated here. Can you explain them in any way? Certainly I can. You can? It seems to me very simple. The room was dimly lighted. Dr. Bauerstein is much of my height and build, and like me, wears a beard. In the dim light and suffering as she was, my poor wife mistook him for me. Ah, murmured Poirot to himself. But it is an idea, that. You think it is true? I whispered. I do not say that, but it is truly an ingenious supposition. You read my wife's last words as an accusation, Inglethorpe was continuing. They were, on the contrary, an appeal to me. The coroner reflected a moment. Then he said, I believe, Mr. Inglethorpe, that you yourself poured out the coffee and took it to your wife that evening? I poured it out, yes, but I did not take it to her. I meant to do so, but I was told that a friend was at the hall door. So I laid down the coffee on the hall table. When I came through the hall again a few minutes later, it was gone. This statement might or might not be true, but it did not seem to me to improve matters much for Inglethorpe. In any case, he had had ample time to introduce the poison. At that point, Poirot nudged me gently, indicating 2 men who were sitting together near the door. One was a little, sharp, dark, ferret-faced man. The other was tall and fair. I questioned Poirot mutely. He put his lips to my ear. Do you know who that little man is? I shook my head. That is Detective Inspector James Japp of Scotland Yard, Jimmy Japp. The other man is from Scotland Yard too. Things are moving quickly, my friend. I stared at the 2 men intently. There was certainly nothing of the policeman about them. I should never have suspected them of being official personages. I was still staring when I was startled and recalled by the verdict being given. Willful murder against some person or persons unknown. As we came out of the Stylites' arms, Poirot drew me aside by a gentle pressure of the arm. I understood his object. He was waiting for the Scotland Yard men. In a few moments they emerged, and Poirot at once stepped forward and accosted the shorter of the 2. I fear you do not remember me, Inspector Japp. Why, if it isn't Mr. Poirot, cried the inspector. He turned to the other man. You've heard me speak of Mr. Poirot? It was in 1900 for he and I worked together. The Abercrombie forgery case. You remember he was run down in Brussels. Ah, those were great days, monsieur. Then, do you remember Baron Altara? There was a pretty rogue for you. He eluded the clutches of half the police in Europe. But we nailed him in Antwerp, thanks to Mr. Poirot here. As these friendly reminiscences were being indulged in, I drew nearer and was introduced to Detective Inspector Japp, who in his turn introduced us both to his companion, Superintendent Summerhay. "I need hardly ask what you're doing here, gentlemen," remarked Poirot. Japp closed one eye knowingly. "No, indeed. Pretty clear case, I should say." But Poirot answered gravely, "There I differ from you." "Oh, come," said Summerhay, opening his lips for the first time. "Surely the whole thing is clear as daylight. The man's caught red-handed. How he could be such a fool beats me." But Japp was looking attentively at Poirot. "Hold your fire, Summerhay," he remarked jocularly. "Me and Monsieur here have met before, and there's no man's judgment I'd sooner take than his. If I'm not greatly mistaken, he's got something up his sleeve. Isn't that so, Monsieur?" Poirot smiled. "I have drawn certain conclusions, yes." Summerhay was still looking rather skeptical, but Japp continued his scrutiny of Poirot. "It's this way," he said. "So far, we've only seen the case from the outside. That's where the Yard's at a disadvantage in a case of this kind, where the murder's only out, so to speak, after the inquest. A lot depends on being on the spot first thing, and that's where Mr. Poirot's had the start of us. We shouldn't have been here as soon as this even, if it hadn't been for the fact that there was a smart doctor on the spot, who gave us the tip through the coroner. But you've been on the spot from the first, and you may have picked up some little hints. From the evidence at the inquest, Mr. Inglethorpe murdered his wife as sure as I stand here. And if anyone but you hinted the contrary, I'd laugh in his face. I must say I was surprised the jury didn't bring it in willful murder against him right off. I think they would have, if it hadn't been for the coroner. He seemed to be holding them back. Perhaps, though, you have a warrant for his arrest in your pocket now," suggested Poirot. A kind of wooden shudder of officialdom came down from Japp's expressive countenance. "Perhaps I have and perhaps I haven't," he remarked dryly. Poirot looked at him thoughtfully. "I am very anxious, Messrs, that he should not be arrested." "I dare say," observed Summerhay sarcastically. Japp was regarding Poirot with comical perplexity. "Can't you go a little further, Mr. Poirot? A wink's as good as a nod from you. You've been on the spot, and the Yard doesn't want to make any mistakes, you know." Poirot nodded gravely. "That is exactly what I thought. Well, I will tell you this. Use your warrant. Arrest Mr. Inglethorpe, but it will bring you no kudos. The case against him will be dismissed at once. Comme c'est." And he snapped his fingers expressively. Japp's face grew grave, though Summerhay gave an incredulous snort. As for me, I was literally dumb with astonishment. I could only conclude that Poirot was mad. Japp had taken out a handkerchief and was gently dabbing his brow. "I daren't do it, Mr. Poirot. I take your word. But there's others over me who'll be asking what the devil I mean by it. Can't you give me a little more to go on?" Poirot reflected a moment. "It can be done," he said at last. "I admit I do not wish it. It forces my hand. I would have preferred to work in the dark, just for the present. But what you say is very just. The word of a Belgian policeman, whose days past is not enough. And Alfred Inglethorpe must not be arrested. That I have sworn, as my friend Hastings here knows. See then, my good Japp, go at once to Styles? Well, in about half an hour. We're seeing the coroner and the doctor first." "Good. Call for me in passing. The last house in the village. I will go with you. At Styles, Mr. Inglethorpe will give you, or if he refuses, as is probable, I will give you such proofs that shall satisfy you that the case against him could not possibly be sustained. Is that a bargain?" "That's a bargain," said Japp heartily. "And on behalf of the Yard, I'm much obliged to you, though I'm bound to confess I can at present see the faintest possible loophole in the evidence. But you always were a marvel. So long, then, monsieur." The two detectives strode away, Summerhay with an incredulous grin on his face. "Well, my friend," cried Poirot, before I could get in a word, "what do you think? Mon Dieu, I had some warm moments in that court. I did not figure to myself that the man would be so pig-headed as to refuse to say anything at all. Decidedly, it was the policy of an imbecile." "There are other explanations besides that of imbecility," I remarked. "For if the case against him is true, how could he defend himself except by silence?" "Why, in 1,000 ingenious ways," cried Poirot. "See, say that it is I who have committed this murder. I can think of 7 most plausible stories, far more convincing than Mr. Inglethorpe's stony denials." I could not help laughing. "My dear Poirot, I am sure you are capable of thinking of 70. But seriously, in spite of what I heard you say to the detectives, you surely cannot still believe in the possibility of Alfred Inglethorpe's innocence. Why not now as much as before? Nothing has changed. But the evidence is so conclusive. Yes, too conclusive. We turned in at the gate of Leastways Cottage and proceeded up the now familiar stairs. Yes, too conclusive, continued Poirot, almost himself. Real evidence is usually vague and unsatisfactory. It has to be examined, sifted. But here the whole thing is cut and dried. No, my friend, this evidence has been very cleverly manufactured. So cleverly that it has defeated its own ends. How do you make that out? Because so long as the evidence against him was vague and intangible, it was very hard to disprove. But in his anxiety, the criminal has drawn the net so closely that one cut will set Inglethorpe free. I was silent, and in a minute or two, Poirot continued, "Let us look at the matter like this. Here is a man, let us say, who sets out to poison his wife. He has lived by his wits, as the saying goes. Presumably, therefore, he has some wits. He is not altogether a fool. Well, how does he set about it? He goes boldly to the village chemist and purchases strychnine under his own name, with a trumped-up story about a dog, which is bound to be proved absurd. He does not employ the poison that night. No, he waits until he has had a violent quarrel with her, of which the whole household is cognizant, and which naturally directs their suspicions upon him. He prepares no defense, no shadow of an alibi. Yet he knows the chemist's assistant must necessarily come forward with the facts. Bah, do not ask me to believe that any man could be so idiotic. Only a lunatic, who wished to commit suicide by causing himself to be hanged, would act so. Still, I do not see," I began. "Neither do I see. I tell you, mon ami, it puzzles me. Me, Hercule Poirot. But if you believe him innocent, how do you explain his buying strychnine?" "Very simply. He did not buy it. But Mace recognized him. I beg your pardon, he saw a man with a black beard like Mr. Inglethorpe's, and wearing glasses like Mr. Inglethorpe, and dressed in Mr. Inglethorpe's rather noticeable clothes. He could not recognize a man whom he had probably only seen in the distance, since you remember he himself had only been in the village a fortnight, and Mrs. Inglethorpe dealt principally with Coots and Tadminster. Then you think, mon ami. Do you remember the 2 points I laid stress upon? Leave the first one for the moment. What was the second? The important fact that Alfred Inglethorpe wears peculiar clothes, has a black beard, and uses glasses, I quoted. Exactly. Now suppose anyone wished to pass himself off as John or Lawrence Cavendish. Would it be easy? No, I said thoughtfully. Of course an actor. But Poirot cut me short ruthlessly. And why would it not be easy? I will tell you, my friend. Because they are both clean-shaven men. To make up successfully as one of these two in broad daylight, it would need an actor of genius, and a certain initial facial resemblance. But in the case of Alfred Inglethorpe, all that is changed. His clothes, his beard, the glasses which hide his eyes, those are the salient points about his personal appearance. Now, what is the first instinct of the criminal? To divert suspicion from himself. Is it not so? And how can he best do that? By throwing it on someone else. In this instance, there was a man ready to his hand. Everybody was predisposed to believe in Mr. Inglethorpe's guilt. It was a foregone conclusion that he would be suspected. But to make a sure thing, there must be tangible proof, such as the actual buying of the poison, and that, with a man of the peculiar appearance of Mr. Inglethorpe, was not difficult. Remember, this young Mace had never actually spoken to Mr. Inglethorpe. How should he doubt that the man in his clothes, with his beard and his glasses, was not Alfred Inglethorpe? It may be so, I said, fascinated by Poirot's eloquence. But if that was the case, why does he not say where he was at 6 o'clock on Monday evening? Ah, why indeed, said Poirot, calming down. If he were arrested, he probably would speak. But I do not want it to come to that. I must make him see the gravity of his position. There is, of course, something discreditable behind his silence. If he did not murder his wife, he is, nevertheless, a scoundrel, and has something of his own to conceal, quite apart from a murder. What can it be? I mused, won over to Poirot's views for the moment, although still retaining a faint conviction that the obvious deduction was the correct one. Can you not guess? Asked Poirot, smiling. No, can you? Oh, yes, I had a little idea some time ago, and it has turned out to be correct. You never told me, I said reproachfully. Poirot spread out his hands apologetically. Pardon me, mon ami, you were not precisely sympathetic. He turned to me earnestly. Tell me, you see now that he must not be arrested? Perhaps, I said doubtfully, for I was really quite indifferent to the fate of Alfred Inglethorpe, and thought that a good fright would do him no harm. Poirot, who was watching me intently, gave a sigh. Come, my friend, he said, changing the subject. Apart from Mr. Inglethorpe, how did the evidence at the inquest strike you? Oh, pretty much what I expected. Did nothing strike you as peculiar about it? My thoughts flew to Mary Cavendish, and I hedged. In what way? Well, Mr. Lawrence Cavendish's evidence, for instance. I was relieved. Oh, Lawrence? No, I don't think so. He's always a nervous chap. His suggestion that his mother might have been poisoned accidentally by means of the tonic she was taking. That did not strike you as strange, Hein? No, I can't say it did. The doctors ridiculed it, of course. But it was quite a natural suggestion for a layman to make. But Monsieur Lawrence is not a layman. You told me yourself that he had started by studying medicine, and that he had taken his degree. Yes, that's true. I never thought of that. I was rather startled. It is odd. Poirot nodded. From the first, his behavior has been peculiar. Of all the household, he alone would be likely to recognize the symptoms of strychnine poisoning. And yet we find him the only member of the family to uphold strenuously the theory of death from natural causes. If it had been Monsieur John, I could have understood it. He has no technical knowledge, and is, by nature, unimaginative. But Monsieur Lawrence, no. And now today he puts forward a suggestion that he himself must have known was ridiculous. There's food for thought in this, mon ami. It's very confusing, I agreed. Then there's Mrs. Cavendish, continued Poirot. That's another who is not telling all she knows. What do you make of her attitude? I don't know what to make of it. It seems inconceivable that she should be shielding Alfred Inglethorpe. Yet that is what it looks like. Poirot nodded reflectively. Yes, it is queer. One thing is certain. She overheard a good deal more of that private conversation than she was willing to admit. And yet she is the last person one would accuse of stooping to eavesdrop. Exactly. One thing her evidence has shown me. I made a mistake. Dorcas was quite right. The quarrel did take place earlier in the afternoon, about 4 o'clock, as she said. I looked at him curiously. I had never understood his insistence on that point. Yes, a good deal that was peculiar came out today, continued Poirot. Dr. Bauerstein. Now what was he doing up and dressed at that hour in the morning? It is astonishing to me that no one commented on the fact. He has insomnia, I believe, I said doubtfully, which is a very good or a very bad explanation, remarked Poirot. It covers everything and explains nothing. I shall keep my eye on our clever Dr. Bauerstein. Any more faults to find with the evidence? I inquired satirically. Mon ami, replied Poirot gravely. When you find that people are not telling the truth, look out. Now, unless I am much mistaken, at the inquest today, only one. At most, 2 persons were speaking the truth without reservation or subterfuge. Oh, come out, Poirot. I won't cite Lawrence or Mrs. Cavendish. But there's John and Miss Howard. Surely they were speaking the truth. Both of them, my friend? One, I grant you, but both. His words gave me an unpleasant shock. Miss Howard's evidence, unimportant as it was, had been given in such a downright straightforward manner that it had never occurred to me to doubt her sincerity. Still, I had a great respect for Poirot's sagacity, except on the occasions when he was what I described to myself as foolishly pig-headed. Do you really think so? I asked. Miss Howard had always seemed to me so essentially honest, almost uncomfortably so. Poirot gave me a curious look, which I could not quite fathom. He seemed to speak, and then checked himself. Miss Murdoch, too, I continued. There's nothing untruthful about her. No, but it was strange that she never heard a sound sleeping next door, whereas Mrs. Cavendish, in the other wing of the building, distinctly heard the table fall. Well, she's young, and she sleeps soundly. Ah, yes, indeed. She must be a famous sleeper, that one. I did not quite like the tone of his voice, but at that moment a smart knock reached our ears, and looking out the window, we perceived the 2 detectives waiting for us below. Poirot seized his hat, gave a ferocious twist to his mustache, and carefully brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve, motioned me to precede him down the stairs. There we joined the detectives and set out for Styles. I think the appearance of the 2 Scotland Yard men was rather a shock, especially to John, though, of course, after the verdict, he had realized that it was only a matter of time. Still, the presence of the detectives brought the truth home to him more than anything else could have done. Poirot had conferred with Japp in a low tone on the way up, and it was the latter functionary who requested that the household, with the exception of the servants, should be assembled together in the drawing-room. I realized the significance of this. It was up to Poirot to make his boast good. Personally, I was not sanguine. Poirot might have excellent reasons for his belief in Inglethorpe's innocence, but a man of the type of Summerhay would require tangible proofs, and these I doubted if Poirot could supply. Before very long we had all trooped into the drawing-room, the door of which Japp closed. Poirot politely set chairs for everyone. The Scotland Yard men were the cynosure of all eyes. I think that for the first time we realized that the thing was not a bad dream, but a tangible reality. We had read of such things. Now we ourselves were actors in the drama. Tomorrow the daily papers all over England would blazon out the news in staring headlines. Mysterious tragedy in Essex. Wealthy lady poisoned. There would be pictures of styles, snapshots of the family leaving the inquest. The village photographer had not been idle. All the things that one had read 100 times. Things that happened to other people, not to oneself. And now, in this house, a murder had been committed. In front of us were the detectives in charge of the case. The well-known glib phraseology passed rapidly through my mind in the interval before Poirot opened the proceedings. I think everyone was a little surprised that it should be he and not one of the official detectives who took the initiative. Mesdames and messieurs, said Poirot, bowing as though he were a celebrity about to deliver a lecture. I have asked you to come here all together for a certain object. That object, it concerns Mr. Alfred Inglethorpe. Inglethorpe was sitting a little by himself. I think unconsciously everyone had drawn his chair slightly away from him, and he gave a faint start as Poirot pronounced his name. Mr. Inglethorpe, said Poirot, addressing him directly. A very dark shadow is resting on this house, the shadow of murder. Inglethorpe shook his head sadly. My poor wife, he murmured. Poor Emily, it is terrible. I do not think, monsieur, said Poirot pointedly, that you quite realize how terrible it may be for you. And as Inglethorpe did not appear to understand, he added, Mr. Inglethorpe, you are standing in very grave danger. The two detectives fidgeted. I saw the official caution. Anything you say will be used in evidence against you, actually hovering on Summerhay's lips. Poirot went on. Do you understand now, monsieur? No. What do you mean? I mean, said Poirot deliberately, that you are suspected of poisoning your wife. A little gasp ran round the circle at this plain speaking. Good heavens, cried Inglethorpe, starting up. What a monstrous idea. I poison my dearest Emily. I do not think, Poirot watched him narrowly, that you quite realize the unfavorable nature of your evidence at the inquest. Mr. Inglethorpe, knowing what I have now told you, do you still refuse to say where you were at 6 o'clock on Monday afternoon? With a groan, Alfred Inglethorpe sank down again and buried his face in his hands. Poirot approached and stood over him. Speak, he cried menacingly. With an effort, Inglethorpe raised his face from his hands. Then slowly and deliberately he shook his head. You will not speak? No. I do not believe that anyone could be so monstrous as to accuse me of what you say. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, like a man whose mind is made up. Soit, he said. Then I must speak for you. Alfred Inglethorpe sprang up again. You? How can you speak? You do not know, he broke off abruptly. Poirot turned to face us. Mesdames and messieurs, I speak. Listen. I, Hercule Poirot, affirm that the man who entered the chemist's shop and purchased strychnine at 6 o'clock on Monday last was not Mr. Inglethorpe. For at 6 o'clock on that day, Mr. Inglethorpe was escorting Mrs. Raikes back to her home from a neighboring farm. I can produce no less than 5 witnesses to swear to having seen them together, either at 6 or just after, and, as you may know, the Abbey Farm, Mrs. Raikes' home, is at least 2.5 miles distant from the village. There's absolutely no question as to the alibi. There was a moment's stupefied silence. Jap, who was the least surprised of any of us, was the first to speak. My word, he cried, you're the goods. And no mistake, Mr. Poirot. These witnesses of yours are all right, I suppose? Well, I have prepared a list of them, names and addresses. You must see them, of course, but you will find it all right. I'm sure of that. Jap lowered his voice. I'm much obliged to you. A pretty mare's nest arresting him would have been. He turned to Inglethorpe. But if you'll excuse me, sir, why couldn't you say all this at the inquest? I will tell you why, interrupted Poirot. There was a certain rumor, a most malicious and utterly untrue one, interrupted Alfred Inglethorpe in an agitated voice. And Mr. Inglethorpe was anxious to have no scandal revived just at present. Am I right? Quite right. Inglethorpe nodded. With my poor Emily not yet buried, can you wonder I was anxious that no more lying rumors should be started? Between you and me, sir, remarked Jap, I'd sooner have any amount of rumors than be arrested for murder. And I venture to think your poor lady would have felt the same. And if it hadn't been for Mr. Poirot here, arrested you would have been, as sure as eggs is eggs. I was foolish, no doubt, murmured Inglethorpe. But you do not know, Inspector, how I have been persecuted and maligned. And he shot a baleful glance at Evelyn Howard. Now, sir, said Jap, turning briskly to John, I should like to see the lady's bedroom, please. And after that I'll have a little chat with the servants. Don't you bother about anything. Mr. Poirot here will show me the way. As they all went out of the room, Poirot turned and made me a sign to follow him upstairs. There he caught me by the arm and drew me aside. Quick, go to the other wing. Stand there, just this side of the baize door. Do not move till I come. Then, turning rapidly, he rejoined the 2 detectives. I followed his instructions, taking up my position by the baize door, and wondering what on earth lay behind the request. Why was I to stand in this particular spot on guard? I looked thoughtfully down the corridor in front of me. An idea struck me. With the exception of Cynthia Murdoch's, everyone's room was in this left wing. Had that anything to do with it? Was I to report who came or went? I stood faithfully at my post. The minutes passed. Nobody came. Nothing happened. It must have been quite 20 minutes before Poirot rejoined me. You have not stirred? No, I've stuck here like a rock. Nothing's happened. Was he pleased or disappointed? You've seen nothing at all? No. But you have probably heard something? A big bump. Am I on me? No. Is it possible? But I'm vexed with myself. I am not usually clumsy. I made but a slight gesture. I know Poirot's gestures, with the left hand and over on the table by the bed. He looked so childishly vexed and crestfallen that I hastened to console him. Never mind, old chap. What does it matter? Your triumph downstairs excited you. I can tell you, that was a surprise to us all. There must be more in this affair of Inglethorpe's with Mrs. Raikes than we thought, to make him hold his tongue so persistently. What are you going to do now? Where are the Scotland Yard fellows? Gone down to interview the servants. I showed them all our exhibits. I am disappointed in Jap. He has no method. Hello, I said, looking out of the window. Here's Dr. Bauerstein. I believe you're right about that man, Poirot. I don't like him. He's clever, observed Poirot meditatively. Oh, clever as the devil. I must say I was overjoyed to see him in the plight he was in on Tuesday. You never saw such a spectacle. And I described the doctor's adventure. He looked a regular scarecrow, plastered with mud from head to foot. You saw him then? Yes. Of course, he didn't want to come in. It was just after dinner. But Mr. Inglethorpe insisted. What? Poirot caught me violently by the shoulders. Was Dr. Bauerstein here on Tuesday evening? Here? And you never told me? Why did you not tell me? Why? He appeared to be in an absolute frenzy. My dear Poirot, I expostulated. I never thought it would interest you. I didn't know it was of any importance. Importance? It is of the first importance. So Dr. Bauerstein was here on Tuesday night, the night of the murder. Hastings, do you not see? That alters everything. I had never seen him so upset. Loosening his hold of me, he mechanically straightened a pair of candlesticks, still murmuring to himself. Yes, that alters everything. Suddenly, he seemed to come to a decision. Allons, he said, we must act at once. Where is Mr. Cavendish? John was in the smoking room. Poirot went straight to him. Mr. Cavendish, I have some important business in Tadminster. A new clue. May I take your motor? Why, of course. Do you mean at once? If you please. John rang the bell and ordered round the car. In another 10 minutes, we were racing down the park and along the high road to Tadminster. Now, Poirot, I remarked resignedly, perhaps you will tell me what all this is about? Well, mon ami, a good deal you can guess for yourself. Of course you realize that now Mr. Inglethorpe is out of it. The whole position is greatly changed. We are face to face with an entirely new problem. We know now that there is one person who did not buy the poison. We have cleared away the manufacture clues. Now for the real ones. I have ascertained that anyone in the household, with the exception of Mrs. Cavendish, who was playing tennis with you, could have personated Mr. Inglethorpe on Monday evening. In the same way we have his statement that he put the coffee down in the hall. No one took much notice of that at the inquest. But now it has a very different significance. We must find out who did take that coffee to Mrs. Inglethorpe eventually, or who passed through the hall whilst it was standing there. From your account, there are only two people whom we can positively say did not go near the coffee, Mrs. Cavendish and Mademoiselle Cynthia. Yes, that is so. I felt an inexpressible lightening of the heart. Mary Cavendish could certainly not rest under suspicion. In clearing Alfred Inglethorpe, continued Poirot, I have been obliged to show my hand sooner than I intended. As long as I might be thought to be pursuing him, the criminal would be off his guard. Now he will be doubly careful. Yes, doubly careful. He turned to me abruptly. Tell me, Hastings, you yourself, have you no suspicions of anybody? I hesitated. To tell the truth, an idea, wild and extravagant in itself, had once or twice that morning flashed through my brain. I had rejected it as absurd. Nevertheless, it persisted. You couldn't call it a suspicion, I murmured. It's so utterly foolish. Come now, urged Poirot encouragingly. Do not fear. Speak your mind. You should always pay attention to your instincts. Well then, I blurted out, it's absurd, but I suspect Miss Howard of not telling all she knows. Miss Howard? Yes, you'll laugh at me. Not at all. Why should I? I can't help feeling, I continued blunderingly, that we've rather left her out of the possible suspects. simply on the strength of her having been away from the place. But, after all, she was only 15 miles away. A car would do it in half an hour. Can we say positively that she was away from Styles on the night of the murder? Yes, my friend, said Poirot unexpectedly. We can. One of my first actions was to ring up the hospital where she was working. Well, I learned that Miss Howard had been on afternoon duty on Tuesday, and that, a convoy coming in unexpectedly, she had kindly offered to remain on night duty, which offer was gratefully accepted. That disposes of that. Oh, I said, rather nonplussed. Really, I continued, it's her extraordinary vehemence against Inglethorpe that started me off suspecting her. I can't help feeling she'd do anything against him, and I had an idea she might know something about the destroying of the will. She might have burnt the new one, mistaking it for the earlier one in his favor. She's so terribly bitter against him. You consider her vehemence unnatural? Why, yes, she is so very violent. I wondered really whether she is quite sane on that point. Poirot shook his head energetically. No, you're on a wrong tack there. There's nothing weak-minded or degenerate about Miss Howard. She is an excellent specimen of well-balanced English beef and brawn. She is sanity itself. Yet her hatred of Inglethorpe seems almost a mania. My idea was a very ridiculous one, no doubt, that she had intended to poison him, and that in some way Mrs. Inglethorpe got hold of it by mistake. But I don't at all see how it could have been done. The whole thing is absurd and ridiculous to the last degree. Still, you are right in one thing. It is always wise to suspect everybody until you can prove logically, and to your own satisfaction, that they are innocent. Now, what reasons are there against Miss Howard's having deliberately poisoned Mrs. Inglethorpe? Why, she was devoted to her, I exclaimed. Cha, cried Poirot irritably. You argue like a child. If Miss Howard were capable of poisoning the old lady, she would be quite equally capable of simulating devotion. No, we must look elsewhere. You are perfectly correct in your assumption that her vehemence against Alfred Inglethorpe is too violent to be natural. But you are quite wrong in the deduction you draw from it. I have drawn my own deductions which I believe to be correct, but I will not speak of them at present. He paused a minute, then went on. Now to my way of thinking. There's one insuperable objection to Miss Howard's being the murderess, and that is that in no possible way could Mrs. Inglethorpe's death benefit Miss Howard. Now there is no murder without a motive. I reflected. Could not Mrs. Inglethorpe have made a will in her favor? Poirot shook his head. But you yourself suggested that possibility to Mr. Wells? Poirot smiled. That was for a reason. I did not want to mention the name of the person who was actually in my mind. Miss Howard occupied very much the same position, so I used her name instead. Still, Mrs. Inglethorpe might have done so. Why, that will, made on the afternoon of her death, may. But Poirot's shake of the head was so energetic that I stopped. No, my friend, I have certain little ideas of my own about that will, but I can tell you this much, it was not in Miss Howard's favor. I accepted his assurance, though I did not really see how he could be so positive about the matter. Well, I said with a sigh, we will acquit Miss Howard then. It is partly your fault that I ever came to suspect her. It was what you said about her evidence at the inquest that set me off. Poirot looked puzzled. What did I say about her evidence at the inquest? Don't you remember? When I cited her and John Cavendish as being above suspicion? Oh, yes. He seemed a little confused, but recovered himself. By the way, Hastings, there is something I want you to do for me. Certainly. What is it? Next time you happen to be alone with Lawrence Cavendish, I want you to say this to him. I have a message for you from Poirot. He says, find the extra coffee cup, and you can rest in peace. Nothing more, nothing less. Find the extra coffee cup, and you can rest in peace. Is that right? I asked, much mystified. Excellent. But what does it mean? That I will leave you to find out. You have access to the facts. Just say that to him and see what he says. Very well, but it's all extremely mysterious. We were running into Tadminster now, and Poirot directed the car to the analytical chemist. Poirot hopped down briskly and went inside. In a few minutes he was back again. There, he said. That is all my business. What were you doing there? I asked in lively curiosity. I left something to be analyzed. Yes, but what? The sample of cocoa I took from the saucepan in the bedroom. But that has already been tested. I cried, stupefied. Dr. Bauerstein had it tested, and you yourself laughed at the possibility of there being strychnine in it. I know Dr. Bauerstein had it tested, replied Poirot quietly. Well then? Well, I have a fancy for having it analyzed again. That is all. And not another word on the subject could I drag out of him. This proceeding of Poirot's, in respect to the cocoa, puzzled me intensely. I could see neither rhyme nor reason in it. However, my confidence in him, which at one time had rather waned, was fully restored since his belief in Alfred Inglethorpe's innocence had been so triumphantly vindicated. The funeral of Mrs. Inglethorpe took place the following day, and on Monday, as I came down to a late breakfast, John drew me aside and informed me that Mr. Inglethorpe was leaving that morning to take up his quarters at the Stylites Arms until he should have completed his plans. And really, it's a great relief to think he's going, Hastings, continued my honest friend. It was bad enough before, when we thought he'd done it, but I'm hanged if it isn't worse now, when we all feel guilty for having been so down on the fellow. The fact is, we've treated him abominably. Of course, things did look black against him. I don't see how anyone could blame us for jumping to the conclusions we did. Still, there it is, we were in the wrong. And now there's a beastly feeling that one ought to make amends, which is difficult, when one doesn't like the fellow a bit better than one did before. The whole thing's damned awkward, and I'm thankful he's had the tact to take himself off. It's a good thing Styles wasn't the martyrs to leave to him. Couldn't bear to think of the fellow lording it here. He's welcome to her money. He'll be able to keep up the place all right? I asked. Oh yes, there are the death duties, of course. But half my father's money goes with the place, and Lawrence will stay with us for the present. So there is a share as well. We shall be pinched at first, of course, because, as I once told you, I am in a bit of a hole financially myself. Still, the Johnnies will wait now. In the general relief at Inglethorpe's approaching departure, we had the most genial breakfast we had experienced since the tragedy. Cynthia, whose young spirits were naturally buoyant, was looking quite her pretty self again, and we all, with the exception of Lawrence, who seemed unalterably gloomy and nervous, were quietly cheerful at the opening of a new and hopeful future. The papers, of course, had been full of the tragedy. Glaring headlines sandwiched biographies of every member of the household, subtle innuendos, the usual familiar tag about the police having clue. Nothing was spared us. It was a slack time. The war was momentarily inactive, and the newspapers seized with avidity on this crime in fashionable life. The mysterious affair at Styles was the topic of the moment. Naturally, it was very annoying for the Cavendishes. The house was constantly besieged by reporters who were consistently denied admission, but who continued to haunt the village and the grounds, where they lay in wait with cameras for any unwary members of the household. We all lived in a blast of publicity. The Scotland Yard men came and went, examining, questioning, lynx-eyed, and reserved of tongue. Towards what end they were working, we did not know. Had they any clue, or would the whole thing remain in the category of undiscovered crimes? After breakfast, Dorcas came up to me, rather mysteriously, and asked if she might have a few words with me. Certainly. What is it, Dorcas? Well, it's just this, sir. You'll be seeing the Belgian gentleman today, perhaps? I nodded. Well, sir, you know how he asked me so particular if the mistress or anyone else had a green dress? Yes, yes. You have found one. My interest was aroused. No, not that, sir. But since then I've remembered what the young gentleman, John and Lawrence were still the young gentleman to Dorcas, called the dressing-up box. It's up in the front attic, sir. A great chest, full of old clothes and fancy dresses and what not. And it came to me, sudden-like, that there might be a green dress amongst them. So, if you tell the Belgian gentleman, I will tell him, Dorcas, I promised. Thank you very much, sir. A very nice gentleman he is, sir, and quite a different class from them two detectives from London, what goes prying about and asking questions. I don't hold with foreigners as a rule, but from what the newspapers say I make out as how these brave Belgies isn't the ordinary run of foreigners, and certainly he's a most polite-spoken gentleman. Dear old Dorcas, as she stood there, with her honest face upturned to mine, I thought what a fine specimen she was of the old-fashioned servant that is so fast dying out. I thought I might as well go down to the village at once and look up Poirot, but I met him halfway, coming up to the house, and at once gave him Dorcas's message. Ah, the brave Dorcas. We will look at the chest, but no matter. We will examine it all the same. We entered the house by one of the windows. There was no one in the hall, and we went straight up to the attic. Sure enough, there was the chest, a fine old piece, all studded with brass nails, and full to overflowing with every imaginable type of garment. Poirot bundled everything out on the floor with scant ceremony. There were one or two green fabrics of varying shades, but Poirot shook his head over them all. He seemed somewhat apathetic in the search, as though he expected no great result from it. Suddenly, he gave an exclamation. What is it? Look, the chest was nearly empty, and there, reposing right at the bottom, was a magnificent black beard. Oh ho, said Poirot. Oh ho. He turned it over in his hands, examining it closely. New, he remarked. Yes, quite new. After a moment's hesitation, he replaced it in the chest. heaped all the other things on top of it, as before, and made his way briskly downstairs. He went straight to the pantry, where we found Dorcas busily polishing her silver. Poirot wished her good morning with Gallic politeness, and went on. "We have been looking through that chest, Dorcas. I am much obliged to you for mentioning it. There is, indeed, a fine collection there. Are they often used, may I ask?" "Well, sir, not very often nowadays, though from time to time we do have what the young gentlemen call a dress-up night. And very funny it is sometimes, sir. Mr. Lawrence, he's wonderful. Most comic. I shall never forget the night he came down as the Tsar of Persia, I think he called it. A sort of Eastern king it was. He had the big paper knife in his hand, and mind, Dorcas, he says, you'll have to be very respectful. This is my specially sharpened scimitar, and it's off with your head if I'm at all displeased with you. Miss Cynthia, she was what they call an Apache, or some such name, a Frenchified sort of cutthroat, I take it to be. A real sight she looked. You'd never have believed a pretty young lady like that could have made herself into such a ruffian. Nobody would have known her. These evenings must have been great fun, said Poirot genially. I suppose Mr. Lawrence wore that fine black beard in the chest upstairs. When you Shah of Persia? He did have a beard, sir, replied Dorcas, smiling. And well, I know it, for he borrowed 2 skeins of my black wool to make it with, and I'm sure it looked wonderfully natural at a distance. I didn't know as there was a beard up there at all. It must have been got quite lately, I think. There was a red wig, I know, but nothing else in the way of hair. Burnt corks they use mostly, though 'tis messy getting it off again. Miss Cynthia was a nigger once, and oh, the trouble she had. So Dorcas knows nothing about that black beard, said Poirot thoughtfully, as we walked out into the hall again. Do you think it is the one? I whispered eagerly. Poirot nodded. I do. You notice it had been trimmed? No. Yes. It was cut exactly the shape of Mr. Inglethorpe's, and I found 1 or 2 snipped hairs. Hastings, this affair is very deep. Who put in the chest, I wonder? Someone with a good deal of intelligence, remarked Poirot dryly. You realize that he chose the one place in the house to hide it where its presence would not be remarked? Yes, he is intelligent. But we must be more intelligent. We must be so intelligent that he does not suspect us of being intelligent at all. I acquiesced. There, mon ami, you will be of great assistance to me. I was pleased with the compliment. There had been times when I hardly thought that Poirot appreciated me at my true worth. Yes, he continued, staring at me thoughtfully. You will be invaluable. This was naturally gratifying. But Poirot's next words were not so welcome. I must have an ally in the house, he observed reflectively. You have me, I protested. True, but you are not sufficient. I was hurt and showed it. Poirot hurried to explain himself. You do not quite take my meaning. You are known to be working with me. I want somebody who is not associated with us in any way. Oh, I see. How about John? No, I think not. The dear fellow isn't perhaps very bright, I said thoughtfully. Here comes Miss Howard, said Poirot suddenly. She is the very person. But I am in her black books since I cleared Mr. Inglethorpe. Still, but try. With a nod that was barely civil, Miss Howard assented to Poirot's request for a few minutes' conversation. We went into the little morning room, and Poirot closed the door. Well, Monsieur Poirot, said Miss Howard impatiently. What is it? Out with it. I'm busy. Do you remember, mademoiselle, that I once asked you to help me? Yes, I do. The lady nodded. And I told you I'd help you with pleasure. Dang Alfred Inglethorpe. Poirot studied her seriously. Miss Howard, I will ask you one question. I beg of you to reply to it truthfully. Never tell lies, replied Miss Howard. It is this. Do you still believe that Mrs. Inglethorpe was poisoned by her husband? What do you mean? She asked sharply. You needn't think your pretty explanations influence me in the slightest. I'll admit that it wasn't he who bought strychnine at the chemist's shop. What of that? I dare say he soaked fly paper, as I told you at the beginning. That is arsenic, not strychnine, said Poirot mildly. What does that matter? Arsenic would put poor Emily out of the way just as well as strychnine. If I'm convinced he did it, it doesn't matter a jot to me how he did it. Exactly. If you are convinced he did it, said Poirot quietly, I will put my question in another form. Did you ever in your heart of hearts believe that Mrs. Inglethorpe was poisoned by her husband? Good heavens, cried Miss Howard. Haven't I always told you the man is a villain? Haven't I always told you he would murder her in her bed? Haven't I always hated him like poison? Exactly, said Poirot. That bears out my little idea entirely. What little idea? Miss Howard, do you remember a conversation that took place on the day of my friend's arrival here? He repeated it to me, and there is a sentence of yours that has impressed me very much. Do you remember affirming that if a crime had been committed and anyone you loved had been murdered, you felt certain that you would know by instinct who the criminal was, even if you were quite unable to prove it. Yes, I remember saying that. I believe it too. I suppose you think it nonsense. Not at all. And yet you'll pay no attention to my instinct against Alfred Inglethorpe. No, said Poirot curtly, because your instinct is not against Mr. Inglethorpe. What? No. You wish to believe he committed the crime. You believe him capable of committing it. But your instinct tells you he did not commit it. It tells you more. Shall I go on? She was staring at him, fascinated, and made a slight affirmative movement of the hand. Shall I tell you why you have been so vehement against Mr. Inglethorpe? It is because you have been trying to believe what you wish to believe. It is because you are trying to drown and stifle your instinct, which tells you another name. No, 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 cried Miss Howard wildly, flinging up her hands. Don't say it. Oh, don't say it. It isn't true. It can't be true. I don't know what put such a wild, such a dreadful idea into my head. I am right, am I not? Asked Poirot. Yes, yes. You must be a wizard to have guessed. But it can't be so. It's too monstrous, too impossible. It must be Alfred Inglethorpe. Poirot shook his head gravely. Don't ask me about it, continued Miss Howard, because I shan't tell you. I won't admit it even to myself. I must be mad to think of such a thing. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied. I will ask you nothing. It is enough for me that it is, as I thought, and I too have an instinct. We are working together towards a common end. Don't ask me to help you because I won't. I wouldn't lift a finger to, she faltered. You will help me in spite of yourself. I ask you nothing, but you will be my ally. You will not be able to help yourself. You will do the only thing that I want of you, and that is, you will watch. Evelyn Howard bowed her head. Yes, I can't help doing that. I am always watching, always hoping I shall be proved wrong. If we are wrong, well and good, said Poirot. No one will be more pleased than I shall. But if we are right, Miss Howard, on whose side are you then? I don't know. Come now. It could be hushed up. There must be no hushing up. But Emily herself, she broke off. Miss Howard, said Poirot gravely, this is unworthy of you. Suddenly she took her face from her hands. Yes, she said quietly. That was not Evelyn Howard who spoke. She flung her head up proudly. This is Evelyn Howard, and she is on the side of justice. Let the cost be what it may. And with these words she walked firmly out of the room. There, said Poirot, looking after her, goes a very valuable ally. That woman, Hastings, has got brains as well as a heart. I did not reply. Instinct is a marvelous thing, mused Poirot. It can neither be explained nor ignored. You and Miss Howard seem to know what you are talking about, I observed coldly. Perhaps you don't realize that I am still in the dark. Really? Is that so, mon ami? Yes. Enlighten me, will you? Poirot studied me attentively for a moment or two. Then, to my intense surprise, he shook his head decidedly. No, my friend. Oh, look here, why not? 2 is enough for a secret. Well, I think it is very unfair to keep back fact from me. I am not keeping back facts. Every fact that I know is in your possession. You can draw your own deductions from them. This time it is a question of ideas. Still, it would be interesting to know. Poirot looked at me very earnestly, and again shook his head. You see, he said sadly, you have no instincts. It was intelligence you were acquiring just now, I pointed out. The two often go together, said Poirot enigmatically. The remark seemed so utterly irrelevant that I did not even take the trouble to answer it. But I decided that if I made any interesting and important discoveries, as no doubt I should, I would keep them to myself, and surprise Poirot with the ultimate result. There are times when it is one's duty to assert oneself. I had had no opportunity as yet of passing on Poirot's message to Lawrence. But now, as I strolled out on the lawn, still nursing a grudge against my friend's high-handedness, I saw Lawrence on the croquet lawn, aimlessly knocking a couple of very ancient balls about, with a still more ancient mallet. It struck me that it would be a good opportunity to deliver my message. Otherwise, Poirot himself might relieve me of it. It was true that I did not quite gather its purport, but I flattered myself that by Lawrence's reply, and perhaps a little skillful cross-examination on my part, I should soon perceive its significance. Accordingly, I accosted him. I've been looking for you, I remarked untruthfully. Have you? Yes. The truth is, I've got a message for you from Poirot. Yes. He told me to wait until I was alone with you, I said, dropping my voice significantly, and watching him intently out of the corner of my eye. I have always been rather good at what is called, I believe, creating an atmosphere. Well, there was no change of expression in the dark, melancholic face. Had he any idea of what I was about to say? This is a message. I dropped my voice still lower. Find the extra coffee cup, and you can rest in peace. What on earth does he mean? Lawrence stared at me in quite unaffected astonishment. Don't you know? Not in the least. Do you? I was compelled to shake my head. What extra coffee cup? I don't know. He'd better ask Dorcas or one of the maids if he wants to know about coffee cups. It's their business, not mine. I don't know anything about the coffee cups except that we've got some that are never used which are a perfect dream. Old Worcester. You're not a connoisseur, are you, Hastings? I shook my head. You miss a lot. A really perfect bit of old china. It's pure delight to handle it, or even to look at it. Well, what am I to tell Poirot? Tell him I don't know what he's talking about. It's double Dutch to me. All right. I was moving off towards the house again when he suddenly called me back. I say, what was the end of that message? Say it over again, will you? Find the extra coffee cup, and you can rest in peace. Are you sure you don't know what it means? I asked him earnestly. He shook his head. No, he said musingly, I don't. I wish I did. The boom of the gong sounded from the house, and we went in together. Poirot had been asked by John to remain to lunch, and was already seated at the table. By tacit consent, all mention of the tragedy was barred. We conversed on the war and other outside topics. But after the cheese and biscuits had been handed round and Dorcas had left the room, Poirot suddenly leant forward to Mrs. Cavendish. Pardon me, madam, for recalling unpleasant memories, but I have a little idea. Poirot's little ideas were becoming a perfect byword, and would like to ask 1 or 2 questions. Of me? Certainly. You are too amiable, madam. What I want to ask is this. The door leading into Mrs. Inglethorpe's room from that of Mademoiselle Cynthia. It was bolted, you say? Certainly it was bolted, replied Mary Cavendish, rather surprised. I said so at the inquest. Bolted? Yes. She looked perplexed. I mean, explained Poirot. You're sure it was bolted and not merely locked? Oh, I see what you mean. No, I don't know. I said bolted, meaning that it was fastened, and I could not open it. But I believe all the doors were found bolted on the inside. Still, as far as you are concerned, the door might equally well have been locked? Oh, yes. You yourself did not happen to notice, madam, when you entered Mrs. Inglethorpe's room, whether that door was bolted or not. I believe it was. But you did not see it? No, I never looked. But I did, interrupted Lawrence suddenly. I happened to notice that it was bolted. Ah, that settles it. And Poirot looked crestfallen. I could not help rejoicing that, for once, one of his little ideas had come to naught. After lunch, Poirot begged me to accompany him home. I consented rather stiffly. You are annoyed, is it not so? He asked anxiously, as we walked through the park. Not at all, I said coldly. That is well. That lifts a great load from my mind. This was not quite what I had intended. I had hoped that he would have observed the stiffness of my manner. Still, the fervor of his words went towards the appeasing of my just displeasure. I thought, I gave Lawrence your message, I said. And what did he say? He was entirely puzzled. Yes, I am quite sure he had no idea of what you meant. I had expected Poirot to be disappointed. But to my surprise, he replied that that was as he had thought, and that he was very glad. My pride forbade me to ask any questions. Poirot switched off on another tack. Mademoiselle Cynthia was not at lunch today? How was that? She is at the hospital again. She resumed work today. Ah, she is an industrious little demoiselle, and pretty too. She is like pictures I have seen in Italy. I would rather like to see that dispensary of hers. Do you think she would show it to me? I am sure she would be delighted. It's an interesting little place. Does she go there every day? She has all Wednesdays off and comes back to lunch on Saturdays. Those are her only times off. I will remember. Women are doing great work nowadays, and Mademoiselle Cynthia is clever. Oh, yes, she has brains, that little one. Yes, I believe she has passed quite a stiff exam. Without doubt. After all, it is very responsible work. I suppose they have very strong poisons there. Yes, she showed them to us. They are kept locked up in a low cupboard. I believe they have to be very careful. They always take out the key before leaving the room. Indeed. It is near the window, this cupboard? No, right the other side of the room. Why? Poirot shrugged his shoulders. I wondered. That is all. Will you come in? We had reached the cottage. No, I think I'll be getting back. I shall go round the long way through the woods. The woods round stiles were very beautiful. After the walk across the open park, it was pleasant to saunter lazily through the cool glades. There was hardly a breath of wind. The very chirp of the birds was faint and subdued. I strolled on a little way, and finally flung myself down at the foot of a grand old beech tree. My thoughts of mankind were kindly and charitable. I even forgave Poirot for his absurd secrecy. In fact, I was at peace with the world. Then I yawned. I thought about the crime, and it struck me as being very unreal and far off. I yawned again. Probably I thought it really never happened. Of course, it was all a bad dream. The truth of the matter was that it was Lawrence who had murdered Alfred Inglethorpe with a croquet mallet. But it was absurd of John to make such a fuss about it, and to go shouting out, "I tell you I won't have it." I woke up with a start, and once I realized that I was in a very awkward predicament. For about 12 feet away from me, John and Mary Cavendish were standing facing each other, and they were evidently quarreling. And quite as evidently, they were unaware of my vicinity, for before I could move or speak, John repeated the words which had aroused me from my dream. "I tell you, Mary, I won't have it." Mary's voice came, cool and liquid. "Have you any right to criticize my actions? It will be the talk of the village. My mother was only buried on Saturday, and here you are gaddying about with the fellow." "Oh," she shrugged her shoulders, "if it is only village gossip that you mind. But it isn't. I've had enough of the fellow hanging about. He's a Polish Jew anyway. A tinge of Jewish blood is not a bad thing. It leavens the—" She looked at him. Stolid stupidity of the ordinary Englishman. Fire in her eyes, ice in her voice. I did not wonder that the blood rose to John's face in a crimson tide. "Mary, well—" Her tone did not change. The pleading died out of his voice. "Am I to understand that you will continue to see Bauerstein against my express wishes? If I choose, you defy me?" I told him of Poirot's intense excitement on hearing that Dr. Bauerstein had been at Styles on the fatal night, and added, he said twice, "That alters everything. And I've been thinking, you know, Inglethorpe said he had put down the coffee in the hall? Well, it was just then that Bauerstein arrived. Isn't it possible that, as Inglethorpe brought him through the hall, the doctor dropped something into the coffee in passing?" Said John. "It would have been very risky." "Yes, but it was possible." "And then, how could he know it was her coffee?" "No, old fellow, I don't think that will wash." But I had remembered something else. "You're quite right. That wasn't how it was done. Listen." And I then told him of the cocoa sample which Poirot had taken to be analyzed. John interrupted just as I had done. "But look here. Bauerstein had it analyzed already?" Yes, that's a point. I didn't see it either until now. Don't you understand? Bauerstein had it analyzed. That's just it. If Bauerstein's a murderer, nothing could be simpler than for him to substitute some ordinary cocoa for his sample, and send that to be tested. And, of course, they would find no strychnine. But no one would dream of suspecting Bauerstein or think of taking another sample except Poirot, I added, with belated recognition. Yes, but what about the bitter taste that cocoa won't disguise? Well, we've only his word for that. And there are other possibilities. He's admittedly one of the world's greatest toxicologists. One of the world's greatest what? Say it again. He knows more about poisons than almost anybody, I explained. Well, my idea is that perhaps he's found some way of making strychnine tasteless. Or it may not have been strychnine at all, but some obscure drug no one has ever heard of, which produces much the same symptoms. Yes, that might be, said John. But look here, how could he have got at the cocoa? That wasn't downstairs. No, it wasn't, I admitted reluctantly. And then suddenly, a dreadful possibility flashed through my mind. I hoped and prayed it would not occur to John also. I glanced sideways at him. He was frowning perplexedly, and I drew a deep breath of relief. For the terrible thought that had flashed across my mind was this, that Dr. Bauerstein might have had an accomplice. Yet surely it could not be. Surely no woman as beautiful as Mary Cavendish could be a murderess. Yet beautiful women had been known to poison. And suddenly I remembered that first conversation at tea on the day of my arrival, and the gleam in her eyes as she had said that poison was a woman's weapon. How agitated she had been on that fatal Tuesday evening. Had Mrs. Inglethorpe discovered something between her and Bauerstein, and threatened to tell her husband? Was it to stop that denunciation that the crime had been committed? Then I remembered that enigmatical conversation between Poirot and Evelyn Howard. Was this what they had meant? Was this the monstrous possibility that Evelyn had tried not to believe? Yes, it all fitted in. No wonder Miss Howard had suggested hushing it up. Now I understood that unfinished sentence of hers, Emily herself, and in my heart I agreed with her. Would not Mrs. Inglethorpe have preferred to go unavenged rather than have such terrible dishonor fall upon the name of Cavendish? There's another thing, said John suddenly, and the unexpected sound of his voice made me start guiltily. Something which makes me doubt if what you say can be true. What's that? I asked, thankful that he had gone away from a subject of how the poison could have been introduced into the cocoa. Why? The fact that Bauerstein demanded a postmortem. He needn't have done so. Little Wilkins would have been quite content to let it go at heart disease. Yes, I said doubtfully, but we don't know. Perhaps he thought it safer in the long run. Someone might have talked afterwards. Then the Home Office might have ordered exhumation. The whole thing would have come out then, and he would have been in an awkward position, for no one would have believed that a man of his reputation could have been deceived into calling it heart disease. Yes, that's possible, admitted John. Still, yet, I'm blessed if I can see what his motive could have been. I trembled. Look here, I said, I may be altogether wrong. And remember, all this is in confidence. Oh, of course, that goes without saying. We had walked, as we talked, and now we passed through the little gate into the garden. Voices rose near at hand, for tea was spread out under the sycamore tree, as it had been on the day of my arrival. Cynthia was back from the hospital, and I placed my chair beside her, and told her of Poirot's wish to visit the dispensary. Of course, I'd love him to see it. He'd better come to tea there one day. I must fix it up with him. He's such a dear little man, but he is funny. He made me take the brooch out of my tie the other day and put in again, because he said it wasn't straight. I laughed. It's quite a mania with him. Yes, isn't it? We were silent for a minute or two, and then, glancing in the direction of Mary Cavendish, and dropping her voice, Cynthia said, Mr. Hastings. Yes. After tea, I want to talk to you. Her glance at Mary had set me thinking. I fancied that between these two there existed very little sympathy. For the first time, it occurred to me to wonder about the girl's future. Mrs. Inglethorpe had made no provisions of any kind for her, but I imagined that John and Mary would probably insist on her making her home with them, at any rate until the end of the war. John, I knew, was very fond of her, and would be sorry to let her go. John, who had gone into the house, now reappeared. His good-natured face wore an unaccustomed frown of anger. Confound those detectives. I can't think what they're after. They've been in every room in the house, turning things inside out and upside down. It really is too bad. I suppose they took advantage of our all being out. I shall go for that fellow Jap when I next see him. Lot of Paul Priss, grunted Miss Howard. Lawrence opined that they had to make a show of doing something. Mary Cavendish said nothing. After tea, I invited Cynthia to come for a walk, and we sauntered off into the woods together. Well, I inquired, as soon as we were protected from prying eyes by the leafy screen. With a sigh, Cynthia flung herself down and tossed off her hat. The sunlight, piercing through the branches, turned the auburn of her hair to quivering gold. Mr. Hastings, you are always so kind, and you know such a lot. It struck me at this moment that Cynthia was really a very charming girl, much more charming than Mary, who never said things of that kind. Well, I asked benignantly, as she hesitated, I want to ask your advice. What shall I do? Do? Yes. You see, Aunt Emily always told me I should be provided for. I suppose she forgot, or didn't think she was likely to die. Anyway, I am not provided for, and I don't know what to do. Do you think I ought to go away from here at once? Good heavens, no. They don't want to part with you, I'm sure. Cynthia hesitated a moment, plucking up the grass with her tiny hands. Then she said, Mrs. Cavendish does. She hates me. Hates you? I cried, astonished. Cynthia nodded. Yes. I don't know why, but she can't bear me. And he can't either. There, I know you're wrong, I said warmly. On the contrary, John is very fond of you. Oh, yes, John. I meant Lawrence. Not, of course, that I care whether Lawrence hates me or not. Still, it's rather horrid when no one loves you, isn't it? But they do, Cynthia dear, I said earnestly. I'm sure you are mistaken. Look, there's John and Miss Howard. Cynthia nodded rather gloomily. Yes, John likes me, I think, and of course Evie, for all her rough ways, wouldn't be unkind to a fly. But Lawrence never speaks to me if he can help it, and Mary can hardly bring herself to be civil to me. She wants Evie to stay on, is begging her to, but she doesn't want me, and I don't know what to do. Suddenly, the poor child burst out crying. I don't know what possessed me. Her beauty, perhaps, as she sat there, with the sunlight glinting down on her head. Perhaps the sense of relief at encountering someone who so obviously could have no connection with the tragedy. Perhaps honest pity for her youth and loneliness. Anyway, I leant forward, and taking her little hand, I said awkwardly, Marry me, Cynthia. Unwittingly, I had hit upon a sovereign remedy for her tears. She sat up at once, drew her hand away, and said, with some asperity, Don't be silly. I was a little annoyed. I'm not being silly. I'm asking you to do me the honor of becoming my wife. To my intense surprise, Cynthia burst out laughing and called me a funny dear. It's perfectly sweet of you, she said. But you know you don't want to. Yes, I do. I've got. Never mind what you've got. You don't really want to, and I don't either. Well, of course, that settles it, I said stiffly. But I don't see anything to laugh at. There's nothing funny about a proposal. No, indeed, said Cynthia. Somebody might accept you next time. Goodbye. You've cheered me up very much. And with a final uncontrollable burst of merriment, she vanished through the trees. Thinking over the interview, it struck me as being profoundly unsatisfactory. It occurred to me suddenly that I would go down to the village and look up Bauerstein. Somebody ought to be keeping an eye on the fellow. At the same time, it would be wise to allay any suspicions he might have as to his being suspected. I remembered how Poirot had relied on my diplomacy. Accordingly, I went to the little house with the apartments card inserted in the window, where I knew he lodged, and tapped on the door. An old woman came and opened it. "Good afternoon," I said pleasantly. "Is Dr. Bauerstein in?" She stared at me. "Haven't you heard?" "Heard what?" "About him." "What about him?" "He's took." "Took? Dead?" "No, took by the police." "By the police?" I gasped. "Do you mean they've arrested him?" "Yes, that's it, and—" I waited to hear no more, but tore up the village to find Poirot. To my extreme annoyance, Poirot was not in, and the old Belgian who answered my knock informed me that he believed he had gone to London. I was dumbfounded. What on earth could Poirot be doing in London? Was it a sudden decision on his part, or had he already made up his mind when he parted from me a few hours earlier? I retraced my steps to Styles in some annoyance. With Poirot away, I was uncertain how to act. Had he foreseen this arrest? Had he not, in all probability, been the cause of it? Those questions I could not resolve. But in the meantime, what was I to do? Should I announce the arrest openly at Styles, or not? Though I did not acknowledge it to myself, the thought of Mary Cavendish was weighing on me. Would it not be a terrible shock to her? For the moment, I set aside utterly any suspicions of her. She could not be implicated. Otherwise, I should have heard some hint of it. Of course, there was no possibility of being able permanently to conceal Dr. Bauerstein's arrest from her. It would be announced in every newspaper on the morrow. Still, I shrank from blurting it out. If only Poirot had been accessible, I could have asked his advice. What possessed him to go posting off to London in this unaccountable way? In spite of myself, my opinion of his sagacity was immeasurably heightened. I would never have dreamt of suspecting the doctor, had not Poirot put it into my head. Yes, decidedly, the little man was clever. After some reflecting, I decided to take John into my confidence, and leave him to make the matter public or not, as he thought fit. He gave vent to a prodigious whistle, as I imparted the news. "Great Scott, you were right then. I couldn't believe it at the time. No, it is astonishing until you get used to the idea, and see how it makes everything fit in. Now, what are we to do? Of course, it will be generally known tomorrow." John reflected. "Never mind," he said at last. "We won't say anything at present. There is no need. As you say, it will be known soon enough." But to my intense surprise, on getting down early the next morning and eagerly opening the newspapers, there was not a word about the arrest. There was a column of mere padding about the Styles poisoning case, but nothing further. It was rather inexplicable, but I suppose that, for some reason or other, Jap wished to keep it out of the papers. It worried me just a little, for it suggested the possibility that there might be further arrests to come. After breakfast, I decided to go down to the village and see if Poirot had returned yet. But before I could start, a well-known face blocked one of the windows, and the well-known voice said, "Bonjour, mon ami." "Poirot," I exclaimed with relief, and seizing him by both hands, I dragged him into the room. I was never so glad to see anyone. "Listen, I have said nothing to anybody but John. Is that right?" "My friend," replied Poirot, "I do not know what you are talking about." "Dr. Bauerstein's arrest, of course," I answered impatiently. "Is Bauerstein arrested, then? Did you not know it?" "Not the least in the world." But pausing a moment, he added, "Still, it does not surprise me. After all, we are only 4 miles from the coast." "The coast?" I asked, puzzled. "What has that got to do with it?" Poirot shrugged his shoulders. "Surely it is obvious." "Not to me. No doubt, I am very dense. But I cannot see what the proximity of the coast has got to do with the murder of Mrs. Inglethorpe." "Nothing at all, of course," replied Poirot, smiling. "But we were speaking of the arrest of Dr. Bauerstein." "Well, he is arrested for the murder of Mrs. Inglethorpe." "What?" cried Poirot, in apparently lively astonishment. "Dr. Bauerstein arrested for the murder of Mrs. Inglethorpe?" "Yes." "Impossible. That would be too good a farce." "Who told you that, my friend?" "Well, no one exactly told me," I confessed. "But he is arrested?" "Oh, yes, very likely. But for espionage, mon ami." "Espion?" I gasped. "Precisely. Not for poisoning Mrs. Inglethorpe?" "Not unless our friend Jap has taken leave of his senses," replied Poirot placidly. But I thought you thought so too?" Poirot gave me one look, which conveyed a wondering pity, and his full sense of the utter absurdity of such an idea. "Do you mean say," I asked, slowly adapting myself to the new idea, That Dr. Bauerstein is a spy? Poirot nodded. Have you never suspected it? It never entered my head. It did not strike you as peculiar that a famous London doctor should bury himself in a little village like this, and should be in the habit of walking about at all hours of the night, fully dressed? No, I confessed. I never thought of such a thing. He is, of course, a German by birth, said Poirot thoughtfully, though he has practiced so long in this country that nobody thinks of him as anything but an Englishman. He was naturalized about 15 years ago. A very clever man. A Jew, of course. The blackguard. I cried indignantly. Not at all. He is, on the contrary, a patriot. Think what he stands to lose. I admire the man myself. But I could not look at it in Poirot's philosophical way. And this is the man with whom Mrs. Cavendish has been wandering about all over the country. I cried indignantly. Yes, I should fancy he had found her very useful, remarked Poirot, so long as gossip busied itself in coupling their names together. Any other vagaries of the doctor's passed unobserved. Then you think he never really cared for her? I asked eagerly. Rather too eagerly, perhaps, under the circumstances. That, of course, I cannot say. But shall I tell you my own private opinion, Hastings? Yes. Well, it is this, that Mrs. Cavendish does not care, and never has cared one little jot about Dr. Bauerstein. Do you really think so? I could not disguise my pleasure. I am quite sure of it, and I will tell you why. Yes, because she cares for someone else, mon ami. Oh, what did he mean? In spite of myself, an agreeable warmth spread over me. I am not a vain man where women are concerned, but I remembered certain evidences, too lightly thought of at the time, perhaps, but which certainly seemed to indicate. My pleasing thoughts were interrupted by the sudden entrance of Miss Howard. She glanced round hastily to make sure there was no one else in the room, and quickly produced an old sheet of brown paper. This she handed to Poirot, murmuring as she did, so the cryptic words, "On top of the wardrobe." Then she hurriedly left the room. Poirot unfolded the sheet of paper eagerly, and uttered an exclamation of satisfaction. He spread it out on the table. "Come here, Hastings. Now tell me, what is that initial J or L?" It was a medium-sized sheet of paper, rather dusty, as though it had lain by for some time. But it was the label that was attracting Poirot's attention. At the top it bore the printed stamp of Messrs. Parksons, a well-known theatrical costumiers, and it was addressed to the debatable initial Cavendish, Esq, Styles Court, Styles, St. Mary, Essex. It might be T, or it might be L, I said after studying the thing for a minute or two. It certainly isn't a J. Good, replied Poirot, folding up the paper again. I also am of your way of thinking. It is an L. Depend upon it. Where did it come from? I asked curiously. Is it important? Moderately so. It confirms a surmise of mine. Having deduced its existence, I set Miss Howard to search for it. And as you see, she has been successful. What does she mean by on the top of the wardrobe? She meant, replied Poirot promptly, that she found it on top of a wardrobe. A funny place for a piece of brown paper, I mused. Not at all. The top of a wardrobe is an excellent place for brown paper and cardboard boxes. I have kept them there myself. Neatly arranged, there is nothing to offend the eye. Poirot, I asked earnestly, have you made up your mind about this crime? Yes, that is to say, I believe I know how it was committed. Unfortunately, I have no proof beyond my surmise unless... With sudden energy, he caught me by the arm and whirled me down the hall, calling out in French in his excitement. Mademoiselle Dorcas, un moment s'il vous plaît. Dorcas, quite flurried by the noise, came hurrying out of the pantry. My good Dorcas, I have an idea, a little idea. If it should prove justified, what magnificent chance. Tell me on Monday, not Tuesday, Dorcas, but Monday, the day before the tragedy. Did anything go wrong with Mrs. Inglethorpe's bell? Dorcas looked very surprised. Yes, sir, now you mention it, it did. Though I don't know how you came to hear of it. A mouse, or some such, must have nibbled the wire through. The man came and put it right on Tuesday morning. With a long-drawn exclamation of ecstasy, Poirot led the way back to the morning room. See, one should not ask for outside proof. No reason should be enough. But the flesh is weak. It is consolation to find that one is on the right track. Ah, my friend, I am like a giant refreshed. I run, I leap, and in very truth, run and leap he did, gambling wildly down the stretch of lawn outside the long window. What is your remarkable little friend doing? Asked a voice behind me, and I turned to find Mary Cavendish at my elbow. She smiled, and so did I. What is it all about? Really, I can't tell you. He asked Dorcas some question about a bell, and appeared so delighted with her answer that he's capering about, as you see. Mary laughed. How ridiculous. He's going out of the gate. Isn't he coming back today? I don't know. I've given up trying to guess what he'll do next. Is he quite mad, Mr. Hastings? I honestly don't know. Sometimes I feel sure he is as mad as a hatter. And then just as he is at his maddest, I find there is method in his madness. I see. In spite of her laugh, Mary was looking thoughtful this morning. She seemed grave, almost sad. It occurred to me that it would be a good opportunity to tackle her on the subject of Cynthia. I began rather tactfully, I thought, but I had not gone far before she stopped me authoritatively. You are an excellent advocate, I have no doubt, Mr. Hastings. But in this case your talents are quite thrown away. Cynthia will run no risk of encountering any unkindness from me. I began to stammer feebly that I hoped she hadn't thought, but again she stopped me, and her words were so unexpected that they quite drove Cynthia and her troubles out of my mind. Mr. Hastings, she said, do you think I and my husband are happy together? I was considerably taken aback and murmured something about its not being my business to think anything of the sort. Well, she said quietly, whether it is your business or not, I will tell you that we are not happy. I said nothing, for I saw that she had not finished. She began slowly, walking up and down the room, her head a little bent, and that slim, supple figure of hers swaying gently as she walked. She stopped suddenly and looked up at me. You don't know anything about me, do you? She asked. Where I come from, who I was before I married John, anything in fact. Well, I will tell you. I will make a father confessor of you. You are kind, I think. Yes, I am sure you are kind. Somehow, I was not quite as elated as I might have been. I remembered that Cynthia had begun her confidences in much the same way. Besides, a father confessor should be elderly. It is not at all the role for a young man. My father was English, said Mrs. Cavendish, but my mother was a Russian. Ah, I said, now I understand. Understand what? A hint of something foreign different that there's always been about you. My mother was very beautiful, I believe. I don't know because I never saw her. She died when I was quite a little child. I believe there was some tragedy connected with her death. She took an overdose of some sleeping draught by mistake. However that may be, my father was broken-hearted. Shortly afterwards, he went into the consular service. Everywhere he went, I went with him. When I was 23, I had been nearly all over the world. It was a splendid life. I loved it. There was a smile on her face, and her head was thrown back. She seemed living in the memory of those old glad days. Then, my father died. He left me very badly off. I had to go and live with some old aunts in Yorkshire. She shuddered. You will understand me when I say that it was a deadly life for a girl brought up as I had been. The narrowness, the deadly monotony of it, almost drove me mad. She paused a minute and added in a different tone. And then I met John Cavendish. Yes, you can imagine that from my aunt's point of view, it was a very good match for me. But I can honestly say it was not this fact which weighed with me. No, he was simply a way of escape from the insufferable monotony of my life. I said nothing, and after a moment, she went on. Don't misunderstand me. I was quite honest with him. I told him what was true, that I liked him very much, that I hoped to come to like him more, but that I was not in any way what the world calls in love with him. He declared that that satisfied him. And so we were married. She waited a long time. A little frown had gathered on her forehead. She seemed to be looking back earnestly into those past days. I am sure he cared for me at first, but I suppose we were not well matched. Almost at once, we drifted apart. It is not a pleasing thing for my pride, but it is the truth, tired of me very soon. I must have made some murmur of dissent, for she went on quickly. Oh, yes, he did. Not that it matters now that we've come to the parting of the ways. What do you mean? She answered quietly. I mean that I am not going to remain at Styles. You and John are not going to live here. John may live here, but I shall not. You're going to leave him? Yes. But why? She paused a long time and said at last, Perhaps, because I want to be free. And as she spoke, I had a sudden vision of broad spaces, virgin tracts of forests, untrodden lands, and a realization of what freedom would mean to such a nature as Mary Cavendish. I seemed to see her for a moment as she was a proud wild creature, as untamed by civilization as some shy bird of the hills. A little cry broke from her lips. You don't know how this hateful place has been prison to me. I understand, I said, but don't do anything rash. Oh, rash. Her voice mocked at my prudence. Then suddenly I said a thing I could have bitten out my tongue for. You know that Dr. Bauerstein has been arrested? An instant coldness passed like a mask over her face, blotting out all expression. John was so kind as to break that to me this morning. Well, what do you think? I asked feebly. Of what? Of the arrest? What should I think? Apparently, he is a German spy. So the gardener had told John. Her face and voice were absolutely cold and expressionless. Did she care or did she not? She moved away a step or two and fingered one of the flower vases. These are quite dead. I must do them again. Would you mind moving? Thank you, Mr. Hastings. And she walked quietly past me out of the window, with a cool little nod of dismissal. No, surely she could not care for Bauerstein. No woman could act her part with that icy unconcern. Poirot did not make his appearance the following morning, and there was no sign of the Scotland Yard men. But at lunchtime, there arrived a new piece of evidence, or rather lack of evidence. We had vainly tried to trace the fourth letter, which Mrs. Inglethorpe had written on the evening preceding her death. Our efforts having been in vain, we had abandoned the matter, hoping that it might turn up of itself one day. And this is just what did happen, in the shape of a communication, which arrived by the second post from a firm of French music publishers, acknowledging Mrs. Inglethorpe's check and regretting they had been unable to trace a certain series of Russian folk songs. So the last hope of solving the mystery, by means of Mrs. Inglethorpe's correspondence on the fatal evening, had to be abandoned. Just before tea, I strolled down to tell Poirot of the new disappointment, but found, to my annoyance, that he was once more out. Gone to London again? Oh, no, monsieur. He has but taken the train to Tadminster. To see a young lady's dispensary, he said. Silly ass. I ejaculated. I told him Wednesday was the one day she wasn't there. Well, tell him to look us up tomorrow morning, will you? Certainly, monsieur. But on the following day, no sign of Poirot. I was getting angry. He was really treating us in the most cavalier fashion. After lunch, Lawrence drew me aside and asked if I was going down to see him. No, I don't think I shall. He can come up here if he wants to see us. Oh, Lawrence looked indeterminate. Something unusually nervous and excited in his manner roused my curiosity. What is it? I asked. I could go if there's anything special. It's nothing much, but, well, if you're going, will you tell him? He dropped his voice to a whisper. I think I found the extra coffee cup. I had almost forgotten that enigmatical message of Poirot's, but now my curiosity was aroused afresh. Lawrence would say no more, so I decided that I would descend from my high horse and once more seek out Poirot at Leastways Cottage. This time I was received with a smile. Monsieur Poirot was within. Would I mount? I mounted accordingly. Poirot was sitting by the table, his head buried in his hands. He sprang up at my entrance. What is it? I asked solicitously. You are not ill, I trust? No, not ill. But I decide an affair of great moment, whether to catch the criminal or not. I asked facetiously, but to my great surprise, Poirot nodded gravely. To speak or not to speak, as your so great Shakespeare says, that is the question. I did not trouble to correct the quotation. You are not serious, Poirot. I am of the most serious, for the most serious of all things hangs in the balance. And that is a woman's happiness, mon ami, he said gravely. I did not quite know what to say. The moment has come, said Poirot thoughtfully, and I do not know what to do. For, see you, it is a big stake for which I play. No one but I, Hercule Poirot, would attempt it. And he tapped himself proudly on the breast. After pausing a few minutes respectfully, so as not to spoil his effect, I gave him Lawrence's message. Ah, he cried. So he has found the extra coffee cup. That is good. He has more intelligence than would appear. This long-faced Monsieur Lawrence of yours. I did not myself think very highly of Lawrence's intelligence, but I forbore to contradict Poirot, and gently took him to task for forgetting my instructions, as to which were Cynthia's days off. It is true, I have the head of a sieve. However, the other young lady was most kind. She was sorry for my disappointment, and showed me everything in the kindest way. Oh, well, that's all right, then. And you must go to tea with Cynthia another day. I told him about the letter. I'm sorry for that, he said. I always had hopes of that letter. But no, it was not to be. This affair must all be unraveled from within. He tapped his forehead. These little gray cells. It is up to them, as you say over here. Then suddenly he asked, Are you a judge of finger mark, my friend? No, I said, rather surprised. I know that there are no two finger marks alike, but that's as far as my science goes. Exactly. He unlocked a little drawer and took out some photographs which he laid on the table. I have numbered them 1, 2, 3. Will you describe them to me? I studied the proofs attentively. All greatly magnified, I see. Number 1, I should say, are a man's fingerprints, thumb and first finger. Number 2 are a lady's. They are much smaller and quite different in every way. Number 3-inch, I paused for some time. There seem to be a lot of confused finger marks, but here very distinctly are number 1s. Overlapping the others? Yes. You recognize them beyond fail? Oh, yes, they are identical. Poirot nodded, and gently taking the photographs from me, locked them up again. I suppose, I said, that, as usual, you are not going to explain? On the contrary. Number 1 were the fingerprints of Monsieur Lawrence. Number 2 were those of Mademoiselle Cynthia. They are not important. I merely obtain them for comparison. Number 3 is a little more complicated. Yes, it is, as you see, highly magnified. You may have noticed a sort of blur extending all across the picture. I will not describe to you the special apparatus, dusting powder, etc., which I used. It is a well-known process to the police, and by means of it you can obtain a photograph of the fingerprints of any object in a very short space of time. Well, my friend, you have seen the finger marks. It remains to tell you the particular object on which they had been left. Go on, I am really excited. Bien. Photo number 3 represents the highly magnified surface of a tiny bottle in the top poison cupboard of the dispensary in the Red Cross Hospital at Tadminster, which sounds like the house that Jack built. Good heavens, I exclaimed. But what were Lawrence Cavendish's finger marks doing on it? He never went near the poison cupboard the day we were there. Oh, yes, he did. Impossible. We were all together the whole time. Poirot shook his head. No, my friend. There was a moment when you were not all together. There was a moment when you could not have been all together, or it would not have been necessary to call to Monsieur Lawrence to come and join you on the balcony. I'd forgotten that, I admitted, but it was only for a moment. Long enough. Long enough for what? Poirot's smile became rather enigmatical. Long enough for a gentleman who had once studied medicine to gratify a very natural interest and curiosity. Our eyes met. Poirot's were pleasantly vague. He got up and hummed a little tune. I watched him suspiciously. Poirot, I said, what was in this particular little bottle? Poirot looked out of the window. Hydrochloride of strychnine, he said, over his shoulder, continuing to hum. Good heavens. I said it quite quietly. I was not surprised. I had expected that answer. They used the pure hydrochloride of strychnine very little, only occasionally for pills. It is the official solution, LIQ, strychnine hydrochlor, that is used in most medicines. That is why the finger marks have remained undisturbed since then. How did you manage to take this photograph? I dropped my hat from the balcony, explained Poirot simply. Visitors were not permitted below at that hour, so in spite of my many apologies, Mademoiselle Cynthia's colleague had to go down and fetch it for me. Then you knew what you were going to find. No, not at all. I merely realized that it was possible from your story for Monsieur Lawrence to go to the poison cupboard. The possibility had to be confirmed or eliminated. Poirot, I said, your gaiety does not deceive me. This is a very important discovery. I do not know, said Poirot, but one thing does strike me. No doubt it has struck you too. What is that? Why, that there is altogether too much strychnine about this case. This is the 3rd time we run up against it. There was strychnine in Mrs. Inglethorpe's tonic. There is the strychnine sold across the counter at Styles, St. Mary by Mace. Now, we have more strychnine handled by one of the household. It is confusing, and as you know, I do not like confusion. Before I could reply, one of the other Belgians opened the door and stuck his head in. There is a lady below asking for Mr. Hastings. A lady? I jumped up. Poirot followed me down the narrow stairs. Mary Cavendish was standing in the doorway. I have been visiting an old woman in the village, she explained. And as Lawrence told me you were with Monsieur Poirot, I thought I would call for you. Alas, madam, said Poirot. I thought you had come to honor me with a visit. I will some day if you ask me, she promised him, smiling. That is well. If you should need a father confessor, madam, she started ever so slightly. Remember, Papa Poirot is always at your service. She stared at him for a few minutes, as though seeking to read some deeper meaning into his words. Then she turned abruptly away. Come, will you not walk back with us too, Monsieur Poirot? Enchanted, madam. All the way to Styles, Mary talked fast and feverishly. It struck me that in some way she was nervous of Poirot's eyes. The weather had broken, and the sharp wind was almost autumnal in its shrewishness. Mary shivered a little, and buttoned her black sports coat closer. The wind through the trees made a mournful noise, like some great giant sighing. We walked up to the great door of Styles, and at once the knowledge came to us that something was wrong. Dorcas came running out to meet us. She was crying and wringing her hands. I was aware of other servants huddled together in the background, all eyes and ears. Oh, no. I don't know how to tell you. What is it, Dorcas? I asked impatiently. Tell us at once. It's those wicked detectives. They've arrested him. They've arrested Mr. Cavendish. Arrested Lawrence? I gasped. I saw a strange look come into Dorcas's eyes. No, sir. Not Mr. Lawrence, Mr. John. Behind me, with a wild cry, Mary Cavendish fell heavily against me, and as I turned to catch her, I met the quiet triumph in Poirot's eyes. The trial of John Cavendish for the murder of his stepmother took place 2 months later. Of the intervening weeks I will say little, but my admiration and sympathy went out unfeignedly to Mary Cavendish. She ranged herself passionately on her husband's side, scorning the mere idea of his guilt, and fought for him tooth and nail. I expressed my admiration to Poirot, and he nodded thoughtfully. Yes, she is of those women who show at their best in adversity. It brings out all that is sweetest and truest in them. Her pride and her jealousy have. Jealousy? I queried. Yes. Have you not realized that she is an unusually jealous woman? As I was saying, her pride and jealousy have been laid aside. She thinks of nothing but her husband, and the terrible fate that is hanging over him. He spoke very feelingly, and I looked at him earnestly, remembering that last afternoon, when he had been deliberating whether or not to speak. With his tenderness for woman's happiness, I felt glad that the decision had been taken out of his hands. Even now, I said, I can hardly believe it. You see, up to the very last minute, I thought it was Lawrence. Poirot grinned. I know you did. But John, my old friend John. Every murderer is probably somebody's old friend, observed Poirot philosophically. You cannot mix up sentiment and reason. I must say, I think you might have given me a hint. Perhaps, mon ami, I did not do so, just because he was your old friend. I was rather disconcerted by this, remembering how I had busily passed on to John what I believed to be Poirot's views concerning Bauerstein. He, by the way, had been acquitted of the charge brought against him. Nevertheless, although he had been too clever for them this time, and the charge of espionage could not be brought home to him, his wings were pretty well clipped for the future. I asked Poirot whether he thought John would be condemned. To my intense surprise, he replied that, on the contrary, he was extremely likely to be acquitted. But Poirot, I protested, oh, my friend, have I not said to you all along that I have no proofs? It is one thing to know that a man is guilty. It is quite another matter to prove him so. And in this case, there is terribly little evidence. That is the whole trouble. I, Hercule Poirot, know, but I lack the last link in my chain. And, unless I can find that missing link, he shook his head gravely. When did you first suspect John Cavendish? I asked after a minute or two. Did you not suspect him at all? No, indeed. Not after that fragment of conversation you overheard between Mrs. Cavendish and her mother-in-law, and her subsequent lack of frankness at the inquest? No. Did you not put two and two together, and reflect that if it was not Alfred Inglethorpe who was quarreling with his wife, and you remember he strenuously denied it at the inquest, it must be either Lawrence or John. Now, if it was Lawrence, Mary Cavendish's conduct was just as inexplicable. But if, on the other hand, it was John, the whole thing was explained quite naturally. So, I cried, a light breaking in upon me. It was John who quarreled with his mother that afternoon? Exactly. And you have known this all along? Certainly. Mrs. Cavendish's behavior could only be explained that way. And yet you say he may be acquitted? Poirot shrugged his shoulders. Certainly I do. At the police court proceedings, we shall hear the case for the prosecution. But in all probability his solicitors will advise him to reserve his defense. That will be sprung upon us at the trial. And, by the way, I have a word of caution to give you, my friend. I must not appear in the case. What? No. Officially, I have nothing to do with it. Until I have found that last link in my chain, I must remain behind the scenes. Mrs. Cavendish must think I am working for her husband, not against him. I say, that's playing a bit low down, I protested. Not at all. We have to deal with a most clever and unscrupulous man, and we must use any means in our power. Otherwise, he will slip through our fingers. That is why I have been careful to remain in the background. All the discoveries have been made by Japp, and Japp will take all the credit. If I am called upon to give evidence at all, he smiled broadly. It will probably be as a witness for the defense. I could hardly believe my ears. It is quite in regla, continued Poirot. Strangely enough, I can give evidence that will demolish one contention of the prosecution. Which one? The one that relates to the destruction of the will. John Cavendish did not destroy that will. Poirot was a true prophet. I will not go into the details of the police court proceedings, as it involves many tiresome repetitions. I will merely state baldly that John Cavendish reserved his defense and was duly committed for trial. September found us all in London. Mary took a house in Kensington, Poirot being included in the family party. I myself had been given a job at the War Office, so was able to see them continually. As the weeks went by, the state of Poirot's nerves grew worse and worse. That last link he talked about was still lacking. Privately, I hoped it might remain so, for what happiness could there be for Mary? If John were not acquitted? On September 15th, John Cavendish appeared in the dock at the Old Bailey, charged with the willful murder of Emily Agnes Inglethorpe, and pleaded not guilty. Sir Ernest Heavywether, the famous K.C., had been engaged to defend him. Mr. Phillips, K.C., opened the case for the Crown. The murder, he said, was a most premeditated and cold-blooded one. It was neither more nor less than the deliberate poisoning of a fond and trusting woman by the stepson to whom she had been more than a mother. Ever since his boyhood, she had supported him. He and his wife had lived at Styles Court in every luxury, surrounded by her care and attention. She had been their kind and generous benefactress. He proposed to call witnesses to show how the prisoner, a profligate and spendthrift, had been at the end of his financial tether, and had also been carrying on an intrigue with a certain Mrs. Rakes, a neighboring farmer's wife. This having come to his stepmother's ears, she taxed him with it on the afternoon before her death, and a quarrel ensued, part of which was overheard. On the previous day, the prisoner had purchased strychnine at the village chemist shop, wearing a disguise by means of which he hoped to throw the onus of the crime upon another man, to wit, Mrs. Inglethorpe's husband, of whom he had been bitterly jealous. Luckily for Mr. Inglethorpe, he had been able to produce an unimpeachable alibi. On the afternoon of July 17th, continued counsel, immediately after the quarrel with her son, Mrs. Inglethorpe made a new will. This was found destroyed in the grate of her bedroom the following morning. But evidence had come to light which showed that it had been drawn up in favor of her husband. Deceased had already made a will in his favor before her marriage, but in Mr. Phillips wagged an expressive forefinger. The prisoner was not aware of that. What had induced the deceased to make a fresh will, with the old one still extant, he could not say. She was an old lady, and might possibly have forgotten the former one, or this seemed to him more likely. She may have had an idea that it was revoked by her marriage, as there had been some conversation on the subject. Ladies were not always very well versed in legal knowledge. She had, about a year before, executed a will in favor of the prisoner. He would call evidence to show that it was the prisoner who ultimately handed his stepmother her coffee on the fatal night. Later in the evening, he had sought admission to her room, on which occasion, no doubt, he found an opportunity of destroying the will which, as far as he knew, would render the one in his favor valid. The prisoner had been arrested in consequence of the discovery in his room by Detective Inspector Japp, a most brilliant officer, of the identical phial of strychnine which had been sold at the village chemist to the supposed Mr. Inglethorpe on the day before the murder. It would be for the jury to decide whether or not these damning facts constituted an overwhelming proof of the prisoner's guilt, and subtly implying that a jury which did not so decide was quite unthinkable. Mr. Phillips sat down and wiped his forehead. The first witnesses for the prosecution were mostly those who had been called at the inquest, the medical evidence being again taken first. Sir Ernest Heavyweather, who was famous all over England for the unscrupulous manner in which he bullied witnesses, only asked 2 questions. I take it, Dr. Bauerstein, that strychnine, as a drug, acts quickly? Yes. And that you are unable to account for the delay in this case? Yes. Thank you. Mr. Mace identified the phial handed him by counsel as that sold by him to Mr. Inglethorpe. Pressed, he admitted that he only knew Mr. Inglethorpe by sight. He had never spoken to him. The witness was not cross-examined. Alfred Inglethorpe was called and denied having purchased the poison. He also denied having quarreled with his wife. Various witnesses testified to the accuracy of these statements. The gardener's evidence as to the witnessing of the will was taken, and then Dorcas was called. Dorcas, faithful to her young gentleman, denied strenuously that it could have been John's voice she heard, and resolutely declared in the teeth of everything that it was Mr. Inglethorpe who had been in the boudoir with her mistress. A rather wistful smile passed across the face of the prisoner in the dock. He knew only too well how useless her gallant defiance was, since it was not the object of the defense to deny this point. Mrs. Cavendish, of course, could not be called upon to give evidence against her husband. After various questions on other matters, Mr. Phillips asked, "In the month of June last, do you remember a parcel arriving for Mr. Lawrence Cavendish from Parkson's?" Dorcas shook her head. "I don't remember, sir. It may have done, but Mr. Lawrence was away from home part of June. In the event of a parcel arriving for him whilst he was away, what would be done with it? It would either be put in his room or sent on after him." "By you?" "No, sir. I should leave it on the hall table. It would be Miss Howard who would attend to anything like that." Evelyn Howard was called and, after being examined on other points, was questioned as to the parcel. "Don't remember. Lots of parcels come. Can't remember one special one. You do not know if it was sent after Mr. Lawrence Cavendish to Wales, or whether it was put in his room? Don't think it was sent after him. Should have remembered it if it was. Supposing a parcel arrived addressed to Mr. Lawrence Cavendish, and afterwards it disappeared, should you remark its absence?" "No, don't think so. I should think someone had taken charge of it." "I believe, Miss Howard, that it was you who found this sheet of brown paper?" He held up the same dusty piece which Poirot and I had examined in the morning room at Styles. Yes, I did. How did you come to look for it? The Belgian detective who was employed on the case asked me to search for it. Where did you eventually discover it? On the top of a wardrobe. On top of the prisoner's wardrobe? I believe so. Did you not find it yourself? Yes. Then you must know where you found it. Yes, it was on the prisoner's wardrobe. That is better. An assistant from Parkson's theatrical costumiers testified that on June 29th, they had supplied a black beard to Mr. L. Cavendish, as requested. It was ordered by letter, and a postal order was enclosed. No, they had not kept the letter. All transactions were entered in their books. They had sent the beard as directed to L. Cavendish Esq. Styles Court. Sir Ernest Heavywether rose ponderously. Where was the letter written from? From Styles Court. The same address to which you sent the parcel? Yes. And the letter came from there? Yes. Like a beast of prey, Heavywether fell upon him. How do you know? I don't understand. How do you know that letter came from Styles? Did you notice postmark? No, but... you did not notice the postmark. And yet you affirm so confidently that it came from Styles. It might, in fact, have been any postmark. Why, yes. In fact, the letter, though written on stamped notepaper, might have been posted from anywhere. From Wales, for instance. The witness admitted that such might be the case, and Sir Ernest signified that he was satisfied. Elizabeth Wells, second housemaid at Styles, stated that after she had gone to bed, she remembered that she had bolted the front door, instead of leaving it on the latch, as Mr. Inglethorpe had requested. She had accordingly gone downstairs again to rectify her error. Hearing a slight noise in the west wing, she had peeped along the passage, and had seen Mr. John Cavendish knocking at Mrs. Inglethorpe's door. Sir Ernest Heavywether made short work of her, and under his unmerciful bullying she contradicted herself hopelessly, and Sir Ernest sat down again with a satisfied smile on his face. With the evidence of Annie, as to the candle grease on the floor, and as to seeing the prisoner take the coffee into the boudoir, the proceedings were adjourned until the following day. As we went home, Mary Cavendish spoke bitterly against the prosecuting counsel. That hateful man, what a net he has drawn around my poor John. How he twisted every little fact until he made it seem what it wasn't. Well, I said consolingly, it will be the other way about tomorrow. Yes, she said meditatively, then suddenly dropped her voice. Mr. Hastings, you do not think. Surely it could not have been Lawrence. Oh, no, that could not be. But I myself was puzzled, and as soon as I was alone with Poirot, I asked him what he thought Sir Ernest was driving at. Ah, said Poirot appreciatively. He is a clever man, that Sir Ernest. Do you think he believes Lawrence guilty? I do not think he believes or cares anything. No, what he is trying for is to create such confusion in the minds of the jury that they are divided in their opinion as to which brother did it. He is endeavoring to make out that there is quite as much evidence against Lawrence as against John, and I am not at all sure that he will not succeed. Detective Inspector Japp was the first witness called when the trial was reopened, and gave his evidence succinctly and briefly. After relating the earlier events, he proceeded. Acting on information received, Superintendent Summerhay and myself searched the prisoner's room during his temporary absence from the house. In his chest of drawers, hidden beneath some underclothing, we found first a pair of gold-rimmed pince-nez similar to those worn by Mr. Inglethorpe. These were exhibited. Secondly, this file. The file was that already recognized by the chemist's assistant, a tiny bottle of blue glass, containing a few grains of a white crystalline powder and labeled strychnine hydrochloride, poison. A fresh piece of evidence discovered by the detective since the police court proceedings was a long, almost new piece of blotting paper. It had been found in Mrs. Inglethorpe's checkbook, and on being reversed at a mirror, showed clearly the words, "Everything of which I die possessed, I leave to my beloved husband Alfred." This placed beyond question the fact that the destroyed will had been in favor of the deceased lady's husband. Japp then produced a charred fragment of paper recovered from the grate, and this, with the discovery of the beard in the attic, completed his evidence. But Sir Ernest's cross-examination was yet to come. What day was it when you searched the prisoner's room? Tuesday, the 24th of July. Exactly a week after the tragedy? Yes. You found these two objects, you say, in the chest of drawers. Was the drawer unlocked? Yes. Does it not strike you as unlikely that a man who had committed a crime should keep the evidence of it in an unlocked drawer for anyone to find? He might have stowed them there in a hurry. But you have just said it was a whole week since the crime. He would have had ample time to remove them and destroy them. Perhaps. There is no perhaps about it. Would he? Or would he not have had plenty of time to remove and destroy them? Yes. Was a pile of underclothes under which the things were hidden heavy or light? Heavyish. In other words, it was winter underclothing. Obviously, the prisoner would not be likely to go to that drawer. Perhaps not. Kindly answer my question. Would the prisoner in the hottest week of a hot summer be likely to go to a drawer containing winter underclothing? Yes or no? No. In that case, is it not possible that the articles in question might have been put there by a third person, and that the prisoner was quite unaware of their presence? I should not think it likely. But it is possible? Yes. That is all. More evidence followed. Evidence as to the financial difficulties in which the prisoner had found himself at the end of July. Evidence as to his intrigue with Mrs. Raikes. Poor Mary. That must have been bitter hearing for a woman of her pride. Evelyn Howard had been right in her facts, though her animosity against Alfred Inglethorpe had caused her to jump to the conclusion that he was the person concerned. Lawrence Cavendish was then put into the box. In a low voice, in answer to Mr. Phillips' questions, he denied having ordered anything from Parkson's in June. In fact, on June 29th, he had been staying away in Wales. Instantly, Sir Ernest Chin was shooting pugnaciously forward. You deny having ordered a black beard from Parkson's on June 29th? I do. In the event of anything happening to your brother, who will inherit Styles Court, the brutality of the question called a flush to Lawrence's pale face. The judge gave vent to a faint murmur of disapprobation, and the prisoner in the dock leant forward angrily. Heavyweather cared nothing for his client's anger. Answer my question, if you please. I suppose, said Lawrence quietly, that I should. What do you mean by you suppose? Your brother has no children. You would inherit it, wouldn't you? Yes. Ah, that's better, said Heavyweather, with ferocious geniality. And you'd inherit a good slice of money too, wouldn't you? Really, Sir Ernest, protested the judge. These questions are not relevant. Sir Ernest bowed, and having shot his arrow, proceeded. On Tuesday, the July 17th, you went, I believe, with another guest, to visit the dispensary at the Red Cross Hospital in Tadminster? Yes. Did you, while you happened to be alone for a few seconds, unlock the poison cupboard and examine some of the bottles? I may have done so. I put to you that you did do so? Yes. Sir Ernest fairly shot the next question at him. Did you examine one bottle in particular? No, I do not think so. Be careful, Mr. Cavendish. I am referring to a little bottle of hydrochloride of strychnine. Lawrence was turning a sickly greenish color. And, I'm sure I didn't. Then how do you account for the fact that you left the unmistakable impress of your fingerprints on it? The bullying manner was highly efficacious with a nervous disposition. I suppose I must have taken up the bottle. I suppose so, too. Did you abstract any of the contents of the bottle? Certainly not. Then why did you take it up? I once studied to be a doctor. Such things naturally interest me. So poisons naturally interest you, do they? Still, you waited to be alone before gratifying that interest of yours? That was pure chance. If the others had been there, I should have done just the same. Still, as it happens, the others were not there? No, but, in fact, during the whole afternoon, you were only alone for a couple of minutes. And it happened to be during those 2 minutes that you displayed your natural interest in hydrochloride of strychnine? Lawrence stammered pitiably. With a satisfied and expressive countenance, Sir Ernest observed, I have nothing more to ask you, Mr. Cavendish. This bit of cross-examination had caused great excitement in court. The heads of the many fashionably attired women present were busily laid together, and their whispers became so loud that the judge angrily threatened to have the court cleared if there was not immediate silence. There was little more evidence. The handwriting experts were called upon for their opinion of the signature of Alfred Inglethorpe in the chemist's poison register. They all declared unanimously that it was certainly not his handwriting, and gave it as their view that it might be that of the prisoner disguised. Cross-examined, they admitted that it might be the prisoner's handwriting cleverly counterfeited. Sir Ernest Heavyweather's speech in opening the case for the defense was not a long one, but it was backed by the full force of his emphatic manner. Never, he said, in the course of his long experience, had he known a charge of murder rest on slighter evidence. Not only was it entirely circumstantial, but the greater part of it was practically unproved. Let them take the testimony they had heard and sift it impartially. The strychnine had been found in a drawer in the prisoner's room. That drawer was an unlocked one, as he had pointed out, and he submitted that there was no evidence to prove that it was the prisoner who had concealed the poison there. It was in fact a wicked and malicious attempt on the part of some third person to fix the crime on the prisoner. The prosecution had been unable to produce a shred of evidence in support of their contention that it was the prisoner who ordered the black beard from Parkson's. The quarrel which had taken place between prisoner and his stepmother was freely admitted, but both it and his financial embarrassments had been grossly exaggerated. His learned friend, Sir Ernest, nodded carelessly at Mr. Phillips, had stated that if the prisoner were an innocent man, he would have come forward at the inquest to explain that it was he, and not Mr. Inglethorpe, who had been the participator in the quarrel. He thought the facts had been misrepresented. What had actually occurred was this. The prisoner, returning to the house on Tuesday evening, had been authoritatively told that there had been a violent quarrel between Mr. and Mrs. Inglethorpe. No suspicion had entered the prisoner's head that anyone could possibly have mistaken his voice for that of Mr. Inglethorpe. He naturally concluded that his stepmother had had two quarrels. The prosecution averred that on Monday, July 16th, the prisoner had entered the chemist's shop in the village, disguised as Mr. Inglethorpe. The prisoner, on the contrary, was at that time at a lonely spot called Marston Spinney, where he had been summoned by an anonymous note, couched in blackmailing terms, and threatening to reveal certain matters to his wife unless he complied with its demands. The prisoner had accordingly gone to the appointed spot, and after waiting there vainly for half an hour had returned home. Unfortunately, he had met with no one on the way there or back who could vouch for the truth of his story. But luckily, he had kept the note, and it would be produced as evidence. As for the statement relating to the destruction of the will, the prisoner had formerly practiced at the bar, and was perfectly well aware that the will made in his favor a year before was automatically revoked by his stepmother's remarriage. He would call evidence to show who did destroy the will, and it was possible that that might open up quite a new view of the case. Finally, he would point out to the jury that there was evidence against other people besides John Cavendish. He would direct their attention to the fact that the evidence against Mr. Lawrence Cavendish was quite as strong, if not stronger than that against his brother. He would now call the prisoner. John acquitted himself well in the witness box, under Sir Ernest's skillful handling. He told his tale credibly and well. The anonymous note received by him was produced and handed to the jury to examine. The readiness with which he admitted his financial difficulties and the disagreement with his stepmother lent value to his denials. At the close of his examination, he paused and said, "I should like to make one thing clear. I utterly reject and disapprove of Sir Ernest Heavywether's insinuations against my brother. My brother, I am convinced, had no more to do with the crime than I have." Sir Ernest merely smiled and noted with a sharp eye that John's protest had produced a very favorable impression on the jury. Then the cross-examination began. "I understand you to say that it never entered your head that the witnesses at the inquest could possibly have mistaken your voice for that of Mr. Inglethorpe. Is not that very surprising?" "No, I don't think so. I was told there had been a quarrel between my mother and Mr. Inglethorpe, and it never occurred to me that such was not really the case. Not when the servant Dorcas repeated certain fragments of the conversation. Fragments which you must have recognized?" "I did not recognize them." "Your memory must be unusually short." "No, but we were both angry, and I think said more than we meant. I paid very little attention to my mother's actual words." Mr. Phillips' incredulous sniff was a triumph of forensic skill. He passed on to the subject of the note. "You have produced this note very opportunely. Tell me, is there nothing familiar about the handwriting of it?" "Not that I know of." "Do you not think that it bears a marked resemblance to your own handwriting, carelessly disguised?" "No, I do not think so." "I put it to you that it is your own handwriting." "No, I put it to you that, anxious to prove an alibi, you conceived the idea of a fictitious and rather incredible appointment, and wrote this note yourself in order to bear out your statement." "No. Is it not a fact that, at the time you claim to have been waiting about at a solitary and unfrequented spot, you were really in the chemist's shop in Styles, St. Mary, where you purchased strychnine in the name of Alfred Inglethorpe?" "No, that is a lie. I put to you that wearing a suit of Mr. Inglethorpe's clothes, with a black beard trimmed to resemble his, you were there, and signed the register in his name." "That is absolutely untrue." "Then I will leave the remarkable similarity of handwriting between the note, the register, and your own to the consideration of the jury," said Mr. Phillips, and sat down with the air of a man who has done his duty, but who was nevertheless horrified by such deliberate perjury. After this, as it was growing late, the case was adjourned till Monday. Poirot, I noticed, was looking profoundly discouraged. He had that little frown between the eyes that I knew so well. "What is it, Poirot?" I inquired. "Ah, mon ami, things are going badly." In spite of myself, my heart gave a leap of relief. Evidently, there was a likelihood of John Cavendish being acquitted. When we reached the house, my little friend waved aside Mary's offer of tea. "No, I thank you, madam. I will mount to my room." I followed him. Still frowning, he went across to the desk and took out a small pack of patience cards. Then he drew up a chair to the table and, to my utter amazement, began solemnly to build card houses. My jaw dropped involuntarily, and he said at once, "No, mon ami, I am not in my second childhood. I steady my nerves, that is all. This employment requires precision of the fingers. With precision of the fingers goes precision of the brain. And never have I needed that more than now. What is the trouble? I asked, with a great thump on the table. Poirot demolished his carefully built-up edifice. It is this, mon ami, that I can build card houses 7 stories high, but I cannot thump, find, thump. That last link of which I spoke to you. I could not quite tell what to say, so I held my peace, and he began slowly building up the cards again, speaking in jerks as he did so. It is done so by placing one card on another, with mathematical precision. I watched the card house rising under his hands, story by story. He never hesitated or faltered. It was really almost like a conjuring trick. What a steady hand you've got, I remarked. I believe I've only seen your hand shake once. On an occasion when I was enraged, without doubt, observed Poirot, with great placidity. Yes, indeed. You were in a towering rage. Do you remember? It was when you discovered that the lock of the dispatch case in Mrs. Inglethorpe's bedroom had been forced. You stood by the mantelpiece, twiddling the things on it in your usual fashion, and your hand shook like a leaf. I must say. But I stopped suddenly, for Poirot, uttering a hoarse and inarticulate cry, again annihilated his masterpiece of cards, and putting his hands over his eyes swayed backwards and forwards, apparently suffering the keenest agony. Good heavens, Poirot! I cried. What is the matter? Are you taken ill? No, he gasped. It is that I have an idea. Oh, I exclaimed, much relieved. One of your little ideas? Ah, ma foi, I know, replied Poirot frankly. This time it is an idea, gigantic, stupendous. And you, my friend, have given it to me. Suddenly clasping me in his arms, he kissed me warmly on both cheeks, and before I had recovered from my surprise, ran headlong from the room. Mary Cavendish entered at that moment. What is the matter with Monsieur Poirot? He rushed past me crying out, A garage. For the love of heaven, direct me to a garage, madam. And before I could answer, he had dashed out into the street. I hurried to the window. True enough, there he was, tearing down the street hatless, and gesticulating as he went. I turned to Mary with a gesture of despair. He'll be stopped by a policeman in another minute. There he goes round the corner. Our eyes met, and we stared helplessly at one another. What can be the matter? I shook my head. I don't know. He was building card houses, when suddenly he said he had an idea, and rushed off as you saw. Well, said Mary, I expect he will be back before dinner. But night fell, and Poirot had not returned. Poirot's abrupt departure had intrigued us all greatly. Sunday morning wore away, and still he did not reappear. But about 3 o'clock, a ferocious and prolonged hooting outside drove us to the window, to see Poirot alighting from a car, accompanied by Jap and Summerhay. The little man was transformed. He radiated an absurd complacency. He bowed with exaggerated respect to Mary Cavendish. Madam, I have your permission to hold a little réunion in the salon? It is necessary for everyone to attend. Mary smiled sadly. You know, Monsieur Poirot, that you have carte blanche in every way. You are too amiable, madam. Still beaming, Poirot marshaled us all into the drawing-room, bringing forward chairs as he did so. Miss Howard here, Mademoiselle Cynthia, Monsieur Lawrence, the good Dorcas, and Annie. Bien. We must delay our proceedings a few minutes until Mr. Inglethorpe arrives. I have sent him a note. Miss Howard rose immediately from her seat. If that man comes into the house, I'll leave it. No. Poirot went up to her and pleaded in a low voice. Finally, Miss Howard consented to return to her chair. A few minutes later, Alfred Inglethorpe entered the room. The company once assembled, Poirot rose from his seat with the air of a popular lecturer, and bowed politely to his audience. Messieurs, mesdames, as you all know, I was called in by Monsieur John Cavendish to investigate this case. I at once examined the bedroom of the deceased, which, by the advice of the doctors, had been kept locked, and was consequently exactly as it had been when the tragedy occurred. I found, first, a fragment of green material. Second, a stain on the carpet near the window, still damp. Thirdly, an empty box of bromide powders. To take the fragment of green material first, I found it caught in the bolt of the communicating door between that room and the adjoining one occupied by Mademoiselle Cynthia. I handed the fragment over to the police, who did not consider it of much importance, nor did they recognize it for what it was, a piece torn from a green land armlet. There was a little stir of excitement. Now there was only one person at Styles who worked on the land, Mrs. Cavendish. Therefore, it must have been Mrs. Cavendish who entered the deceased's room through the door communicating with Mademoiselle Cynthia's room. But that door was bolted on the inside. I cried. When I examined the room, yes. But in the first place, we have only her word for it, since it was she who tried that particular door and reported fastened. In the ensuing confusion, she would have had ample opportunity to shoot the bolt across. I took an early opportunity of verifying my conjectures. To begin with, the fragment corresponds exactly with a tear in Mrs. Cavendish's armlet. Also, at the inquest, Mrs. Cavendish declared that she had heard, from her own room, the fall of the table by the bed. I took an early opportunity of testing that statement by stationing my friend Monsieur Hastings in the left wing of the building, just outside Mrs. Cavendish's door. I myself, in company with the police, went to the deceased's room, and whilst their eye apparently accidentally knocked over the table in question, but found that, as I had expected, Monsieur Hastings had heard no sound at all. This confirmed my belief that Mrs. Cavendish was not speaking the truth when she declared that she had been dressing in her room at the time of the tragedy. In fact, I was convinced that, far from having been in her own room, Mrs. Cavendish was actually in the deceased's room when the alarm was given. I shot a quick glance at Mary. She was very pale but smiling. I proceeded to reason on that assumption. Mrs. Cavendish is in her mother-in-law's room. We will say that she is seeking for something and has not yet found it. Suddenly, Mrs. Inglethorpe awakens and is seized with an alarming paroxysm. She flings out her arm, overturning the bed table, and then pulls desperately at the bell. Mrs. Cavendish, startled, drops her candle, scattering the grease on the carpet. She picks it up and retreats quickly to Mademoiselle Cynthia's room, closing the door behind her. She hurries out into the passage, for the servants must not find her where she is. But it is too late. Already footsteps are echoing along the gallery which connects the two wings. What can she do? Quick as thought, she hurries back to the young girl's room and starts shaking her awake. The hastily aroused household come trooping down the passage. They are all busily battering at Mrs. Inglethorpe's door. It occurs to nobody that Mrs. Cavendish has not arrived with the rest. But, and this is significant, I can find no one who saw her come from the other wing. He looked at Mary Cavendish. Am I right, madam? She bowed her head. Quite right, monsieur. You understand that if I had thought I would do my husband any good by revealing these facts, I would have done so. But it did not seem to me to bear upon the question of his guilt or innocence. In a sense, that is correct, madam. But it cleared my mind of many misconceptions and left me free to see other facts in their true significance. The will, cried Lawrence. Then it was you, Mary, who destroyed the will? She shook her head, and Poirot shook his also. No, he said quietly. There is only one person who could possibly have destroyed that will. Mrs. Inglethorpe herself. Impossible, I exclaimed. She had only made it out that very afternoon. Nevertheless, mon ami, it was Mrs. Inglethorpe, because in no other way can you account for the fact that on one of the hottest days of the year, Mrs. Inglethorpe ordered a fire to be lighted in her room. I gave a gasp. What idiots we had been never to think of that fire as being incongruous. Poirot was continuing. The temperature on that day, Messrs., was 80 degrees in the shade. Yet Mrs. Inglethorpe ordered a fire. Why? Because she wished to destroy something, and could think of no other way. You will remember that in consequence of the war economics practiced at Styles, no waste paper was thrown away. There was therefore no means of destroying a thick document, such as a will. The moment I heard of a fire being lighted in Mrs. Inglethorpe's room, I leaped to the conclusion that it was to destroy some important document, possibly a will. So the discovery of the charred fragment in the grate was no surprise to me. I did not, of course, know at the time that the will in question had only been made this afternoon, and I will admit that, when I learnt that fact, I fell into a grievous error. I came to the conclusion that Mrs. Inglethorpe's determination to destroy her will arose as a direct consequence of the quarrel she had that afternoon, and that therefore the quarrel took place after, and not before the making of the will. Here, as we know, I was wrong, and I was forced to abandon that idea. I faced the problem from a new standpoint. Now at 4 o'clock, Dorcas overheard her mistress saying angrily, You need not think that any fear of publicity or scandal between husband and wife will deter me. I conjectured, and conjectured rightly, that these words were addressed not to her husband, but to Mr. John Cavendish. At 5 o'clock, an hour later, she uses almost the same words, but the standpoint is different. She admits to Dorcas, "I don't know what to do. Scandal between husband and wife is a dreadful thing." At 4 o'clock, she has been angry, but completely mistress of herself. At 5 o'clock, she is in violent distress, and speaks of having had a great shock. Looking at the matter psychologically, I drew one deduction which I was convinced was correct. The second scandal she spoke of was not the same as the first, and it concerned herself. Let us reconstruct. At 4 o'clock, Mrs. Inglethorpe quarrels with her son, and threatens to denounce him to his wife, who, by the way, overheard the greater part of the conversation. At 4:30, Mrs. Inglethorpe, in consequence of a conversation on the validity of wills, makes a will in favor of her husband, which the two gardeners witness. At 5 o'clock, Dorcas finds her mistress in a state of considerable agitation, with a slip of paper, a letter, Dorcas thinks, in her hand, and it is then that she orders the fire in her room to be lighted. Presumably then, between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, something has occurred to occasion a complete revolution of feeling, since she is now as anxious to destroy the will as she was before to make it. What was that something? As far as we know, she was quite alone during that half hour. Nobody entered or left that boudoir. What then occasioned this sudden change of sentiment? One can only guess, but I believe my guess to be correct. Mrs. Inglethorpe had no stamps in her desk. We know this, because later she asked Dorcas to bring her some. Now, in the opposite corner of the room stood her husband's desk, locked. She was anxious to find some stamps, and according to my theory, she tried her own keys in the desk. That one of them fitted, I know. She therefore opened the desk, and in searching for the stamps, she came across something else. That slip of paper which Dorcas saw in her hand, and which assuredly was never meant for Mrs. Inglethorpe's eyes. On the other hand, Mrs. Cavendish believed that the slip of paper to which her mother-in-law clung so tenaciously was a written proof of her own husband's infidelity. She demanded it from Mrs. Inglethorpe, who assured her, quite truly, that it had nothing to do with that matter. Mrs. Cavendish did not believe her. She thought that Mrs. Inglethorpe was shielding her stepson. Now, Mrs. Cavendish is a very resolute woman, and behind her mask of reserve, she was madly jealous of her husband. She determined to get hold of that paper at all costs, and in this resolution chance came to her aid. She happened to pick up the key of Mrs. Inglethorpe's dispatch case, which had been lost that morning. She knew that her mother-in-law invariably kept all important papers in this particular case. Mrs. Cavendish, therefore, made her plans as only a woman driven desperate through jealousy could have done. Sometime in the evening, she unbolted the door leading into Mademoiselle Cynthia's room. Possibly she applied oil to the hinges, for I found that it opened quite noiselessly when I tried it. She put off her project until the early hours of the morning as being safer, since the servants were accustomed to hearing her move about her room at that time. She dressed completely in her land kit and made her way quietly through Mademoiselle Cynthia's room into that of Mrs. Inglethorpe. He paused a moment, and Cynthia interrupted. "But I should have woken up if anyone had come through my room." "Not if you were drugged, mademoiselle." "Drugged? Mais, oui." You remember, he addressed us collectively again, that through all the tumult and noise next door, Mademoiselle Cynthia slept. That admitted of two possibilities. Either her sleep was feigned, which I did not believe, or her unconsciousness was induced by artificial means. With this latter idea in my mind, I examined all the coffee cups most carefully, remembering that it was Mrs. Cavendish who had brought Mademoiselle Cynthia her coffee the night before. I took a sample from each cup and had them analyzed with no result. I had counted the cups carefully, in the event of one having been removed. 6 persons had taken coffee, and 6 cups were duly found. I had to confess myself mistaken. Then I discovered that I had been guilty of a very grave oversight. Coffee had been brought in for 7 persons, not 6, for Dr. Bauerstein had been there that evening. This changed the face of the whole affair, for there was now 1 cup missing. The servants noticed nothing, since Annie, the housemaid who took in the coffee, brought in 7 cups, not knowing that Mr. Inglethorpe never drank it, whereas Dorcas, who cleared them away the following morning, found 6 as usual, or strictly speaking she found 5, the 6th being the one found broken in Mrs. Inglethorpe's room. I was confident that the missing cup was that of Mademoiselle Cynthia. I had an additional reason for that belief in the fact that all the cups found contained sugar, which Mademoiselle Cynthia never took in her coffee. My attention was attracted by the story of Annie about some salt on the tray of cocoa which she took every night to Mrs. Inglethorpe's room. I accordingly secured a sample of that cocoa and sent it to be analyzed. But that had already been done by Dr. Bauerstein, said Lawrence quickly. Not exactly. The analyst was asked by him to report whether strychnine was or was not present. He did not have it tested as I did for a narcotic. For a narcotic? Yes. Here is the analyst's report. Mrs. Cavendish administered a safe, but effectual, narcotic to both Mrs. Inglethorpe and Mademoiselle Cynthia, and it is possible that she had a mauvaise quart d'art in consequence. Imagine her feelings when her mother-in-law is suddenly taken ill and dies, and immediately after she hears the word poison. She has believed that the sleeping draught she administered was perfectly harmless. But there is no doubt that for one terrible moment she must have feared that Mrs. Inglethorpe's death lay at her door. She is seized with panic, and under its influence, she hurries downstairs and quickly drops the coffee cup and saucer used by Mademoiselle Cynthia into a large brass vase, where it is discovered later by Monsieur Lawrence. The remains of the cocoa she dare not touch. Too many eyes are upon her. Guess at her relief when strychnine is mentioned, and she discovers that after all the tragedy is not her doing. We are now able to account for the symptoms of strychnine poisoning being so long in making their appearance. A narcotic taken with strychnine will delay the action of the poison for some hours. Poirot paused. Mary looked up at him, the color slowly rising in her face. All you have said is quite true, Monsieur Poirot. It was the most awful hour of my life. I shall never forget it. But you are wonderful. I understand now what I meant when I told you that you could safely confess to Papa Poirot. But you would not trust me. I see everything now, said Lawrence. The drugged cocoa, taken on top of the poisoned coffee, amply accounts for the delay. Exactly. But was the coffee poisoned, or was it not? We come to a little difficulty here, since Mrs. Inglethorpe never drank it. What? The cry of surprise was universal. No. You will remember my speaking of a stain on the carpet in Mrs. Inglethorpe's room? There were some peculiar points about that stain. It was still damp. It exhaled the strong odor of coffee. And embedded in the nap of the carpet, I found some little splinters of china. What had happened was plain to me, for not 2 minutes before I had placed my little case on the table near the window, and the table tilting up, had deposited it upon the floor on precisely the identical spot. In exactly the same way, Mrs. Inglethorpe had laid down her cup of coffee on reaching her room the night before, and the treacherous table had played her the same trick. What happened next is mere guesswork on my part, but I should say that Mrs. Inglethorpe picked up the broken cup and placed it on the table by the bed. Feeling in need of a stimulant of some kind, she heated up her cocoa and drank it off then and there. Now we are faced with a new problem. We know the cocoa contained no strychnine. The coffee was never drunk. Yet the strychnine must have been administered between 7 and 9 o'clock that evening. What third medium was there? A medium so suitable for disguising the taste of strychnine that it is extraordinary no one has thought of it. Poirot looked round the room, and then answered himself impressively. Her medicine. Do you mean that the murderer introduced the strychnine into her tonic? I cried. There was no need to introduce it. It was already there in the mixture. The strychnine that killed Mrs. Inglethorpe was the identical strychnine prescribed by Dr. Wilkins. To make that clear to you, I will read you an extract from a book on dispensing which I found in the dispensary of the Red Cross Hospital at Tadminster. The following prescription has become famous in textbooks. Strychninesulf, potass bromide, aqua add, fiat mistura. This solution deposits in a few hours the greater part of the strychnine salt as an insoluble bromide in transparent crystals. A lady in England lost her life by taking a similar mixture. The precipitated strychnine collected at the bottom, and in taking the last dose she swallowed nearly all of it. Now there was, of course, no bromide in Dr. Wilkins' prescription, but you will remember that I mentioned an empty box of bromide powders. 1 or 2 of those powders introduced into the full bottle of medicine would effectually precipitate the strychnine, as the book describes, and cause it to be taken in the last dose. You will learn later that the person who usually poured out Mrs. Inglethorpe's medicine was always extremely careful not to shake the bottle, but to leave the sediment at the bottom of it undisturbed. Throughout the case, there have been evidences that the tragedy was intended to take place on Monday evening. On that day, Mrs. Inglethorpe's bell wire was neatly cut, and on Monday evening Mademoiselle Cynthia was spending the night with friends, so that Mrs. Inglethorpe would have been quite alone in the right wing, completely shut off from help of any kind, and would have died in all probability before medical aid could have been summoned. But in her hurry to be in time for the village entertainment, Mrs. Inglethorpe forgot to take her medicine, and the next day she lunched away from home, so that the last and fatal dose was actually taken 24 hours later than had been anticipated by the murderer. And it is owing to that delay that the final proof, the last link of the chain, is now in my hands. Amid breathless excitement, he held out 3 thin strips of paper. A letter in the murderer's own handwriting. Amias Amos. Had it been a little clearer in its terms, it is possible that Mrs. Inglethorpe, warned in time, would have escaped. As it was, she realized her danger, but not the manner of it. In the deathly silence, Poirot pieced together the slips of paper and, clearing his throat, read, "Dearest Evelyn, you will be anxious at hearing nothing. It is all right, only it will be tonight instead of last night. You understand. There's a good time coming once the old woman is dead and out of the way. No one can possibly bring home the crime to me. That idea of yours about the bromides was a stroke of genius. But we must be very circumspect. A false step?" Here, my friends, the letter breaks off. Doubtless the writer was interrupted, but there can be no question as to his identity. We all know this handwriting, and a howl that was almost a scream broke the silence. "You devil, how did you get it?" A chair was overturned. Poirot skipped nimbly aside. A quick movement on his part, and his assailant fell with a crash. "Messieurs, mesdames," said Poirot with a flourish. "Let me introduce you to the murderer, Mr. Alfred Inglethorpe." "Poirot, you old villain," I said, "I've half a mind to strangle you. What do you mean by deceiving me as you have done?" We were sitting in the library. Several hectic days lay behind us. In the room below, John and Mary were together once more, while Alfred Inglethorpe and Miss Howard were in custody. Now at last I had Poirot to myself, and could relieve my still burning curiosity. Poirot did not answer me for a moment, but at last he said, "I did not deceive you, mon ami. At most, I permitted you to deceive yourself." "Yes, but why?" "Well, it is difficult to explain. You see, my friend, you have a nature so honest, and a countenance so transparent, that, enfant, to conceal your feelings is impossible. If I had told you my ideas, the very first time you saw Mr. Alfred Inglethorpe, that astute gentleman would have, in your so expressive idiom, smelled a rat, and then bonjour to our chances of catching him. I think that I have more diplomacy than you give me credit for." "My friend," besought Poirot, "I implore you, do not enrage yourself. Your help has been of the most invaluable. It is but the extremely beautiful nature that you have which made me pause." "Well," I grumbled, a little mollified, "I still think you might have given me a hint." "But I did, my friend. Several hints. You would not take them. Think now. Did I ever say to you that I believe John Cavendish guilty? Did I not, on the contrary, tell you that he would almost certainly be acquitted? Yes, but... And did I not immediately afterwards speak of the difficulty of bringing the murderer to justice? Was it not plain to you that I was speaking of two entirely different persons?" "No," I said, "it was not plain to me." "Then again," continued Poirot, at the beginning, "did I not repeat to you several times that I didn't want Mr. Inglethorpe arrested now? That should have conveyed something to you. Do you mean to say you suspected him as long ago as that?" "Yes. To begin with, whoever else might benefit by Mrs. Inglethorpe's death, her husband would benefit the most. There was no getting away from that. When I went up to Styles with you that first day, I had no idea as to how the crime had been committed. But from what I knew of Mr. Inglethorpe, I fancied that it would be very hard to find anything to connect him with it. When I arrived at the chateau, I realized at once that it was Mrs. Inglethorpe who had burnt the will. And there, by the way, you cannot complain, my friend, for I tried my best to force on you the significance of that bedroom fire in midsummer." Yes, I said impatiently. "Go on." "Well, my friend, as I say, my views as to Mr. Inglethorpe's guilt were very much shaken. There was, in fact, so much evidence against him that I was inclined to believe that he had not done it." "When did you change your mind?" "When I found that the more efforts I made to clear him, the more efforts he made to get himself arrested. Then when I discovered that Inglethorpe had nothing to do with Mrs. Raikes, and that in fact it was John Cavendish who was interested in that quarter, I was quite sure." "But why?" "Simply this. If it had been Inglethorpe who was carrying on an intrigue with Mrs. Raikes, his silence was perfectly comprehensible. But when I discovered that it was known all over the village that it was John who was attracted by the farmer's pretty wife, his silence bore quite a different interpretation. It was nonsense to pretend that he was afraid of a scandal, as no possible scandal could attach to him. This attitude of his gave me furiously to think, and I was slowly forced to the conclusion that Alfred Inglethorpe wanted to be arrested. Et bien, from that moment, I was equally determined that he should not be arrested." "Wait a minute. I don't see why he wished to be arrested." "Because, mon ami, it is the law of your country that a man once acquitted can never be tried again for the same offense." "But it was clever, his idea. Assuredly, he is a man of method. See here, he knew that in his position he was bound to be suspected. So he conceived the exceedingly clever idea of preparing a lot of manufactured evidence against himself. He wished to be arrested. He would then produce his irreproachable alibi. And hey presto, he was safe for life. But I still don't see how he managed to prove his alibi. And yet go to the chemist's shop? Poirot stared at me in surprise. Is it possible? My poor friend, you have not yet realized that it was Miss Howard who went to the chemist's shop. Miss Howard? But certainly, who else? It was most easy for her. She is of a good height. Her voice is deep and manly. Moreover, remember, she and Inglethorpe are cousins, and there is a distinct resemblance between them, especially in their gait and bearing. It was simplicity itself. They are a clever pair. I am still a little fogged as to how exactly the bromide business was done, I remarked. Bon, I will reconstruct for you as far as possible. I am inclined to think that Miss Howard was the mastermind in that affair. You remember her once mentioning that her father was a doctor? Possibly she dispensed his medicines for him, or she may have taken the idea from one of the many books lying about when Mademoiselle Cynthia was studying for her exam. Anyway, she was familiar with the fact that the addition of a bromide to a mixture containing strychnine would cause the precipitation of the latter. Probably the idea came to her quite suddenly. Mrs. Inglethorpe had a box of bromide powders, which she occasionally took at night. What could be easier than quietly to dissolve one or more of those powders in Mrs. Inglethorpe's large-sized bottle of medicine when it came from Coots? The risk is practically nil. The tragedy will not take place until nearly a fortnight later. If anyone has seen either of them touching the medicine, they will have forgotten it by that time. Miss Howard will have engineered her quarrel and departed from the house. The lapse of time in her absence will defeat all suspicion. Yes, it was a clever idea. If they had left it alone, it is possible the crime might never have been brought home to them. But they were not satisfied. They tried to be too clever, and that was their undoing. Poirot puffed at his tiny cigarette, his eyes fixed on ceiling. They arranged a plan to throw suspicion on John Cavendish by buying strychnine at the village chemist's and signing the register in his handwriting. On Monday, Mrs. Inglethorpe will take the last dose of her medicine. On Monday, therefore, at 6 o'clock, Alfred Inglethorpe arranges to be seen by a number of people at a spot far removed from the village. Miss Howard has previously made up a cock and bull story about him, and Mrs. Rakes to account for his holding his tongue afterwards. At 6 o'clock, Miss Howard, disguised as Alfred Inglethorpe, enters the chemist's shop with her story about a dog, obtains the strychnine, and writes the name of Alfred Inglethorpe in John's handwriting, which she had previously studied carefully. But as it will never do if John, too, can prove an alibi, she writes him an anonymous note, still copying his handwriting, which takes him to a remote spot where it is exceedingly unlikely that anyone will see him. So far, all goes well. Miss Howard goes back to Midlingham. Alfred Inglethorpe returns to Styles. There's nothing that can compromise him in any way, since it is Miss Howard who has the strychnine, which, after all, is only wanted as a blind to throw suspicion on John Cavendish. But now a hitch occurs. Mrs. Inglethorpe does not take her medicine that night. The broken bell Cynthia's absence, arranged by Inglethorpe through his wife. All these are wasted. And then he makes a slip. Mrs. Inglethorpe is out, and he sits down to write to his accomplice, who he fears may be in a panic at the non-success of their plan. It is probable that Mrs. Inglethorpe returned earlier than he expected. Caught in the act, and somewhat flurried, he hastily shuts and locks his desk. He fears that if he remains in the room, he may have to open it again, and that Mrs. Inglethorpe might catch sight of the letter before he could snatch it up. So he goes out and walks in the woods, little dreaming that Mrs. Inglethorpe will open his desk and discover the incriminating document. But this, as we know, is what happened. Mrs. Inglethorpe reads it and becomes aware of the perfidy of her husband and Evelyn Howard, though, unfortunately, the sentence about the bromides conveys no warning to her mind. She knows that she is in danger, but is ignorant of where the danger lies. She decides to say nothing to her husband, but sits down and writes to her solicitor, asking him to come on the morrow. And she also determines to destroy immediately the will which she has just made. She keeps the fatal letter. It was to discover that letter, then, that her husband forced the lock of the dispatch case? Yes, and from the enormous risk he ran we can see how fully he realized its importance. That letter accepted, there was absolutely nothing to connect him with the crime. There's only one thing I can't make out. Why didn't he destroy it at once when he got hold of it? Because he did not dare take the biggest risk of all, that of keeping it on his own person. I don't understand. Look at it from his point of view. I have discovered that there were only 5 short minutes in which he could have taken it. The 5 minutes immediately before our own arrival on the scene. for before that time Annie was brushing the stairs and would have seen anyone who passed going to the right wing. Figure to yourself the scene. He enters the room, unlocking the door by means of one of the other door keys. They were all much alike. He hurries to the dispatch case. It is locked, and the keys are nowhere to be seen. That is a terrible blow to him, for it means that his presence in the room cannot be concealed as he had hoped. But he sees clearly that everything must be risked for the sake of that damning piece of evidence. Quickly, he forces the lock with a penknife and turns over the papers until he finds what he is looking for. But now a fresh dilemma arises. He dare not keep that piece of paper on him. He may be seen leaving the room. He may be searched. If the paper is found on him, it is certain doom. Probably at this minute, too. He hears the sounds below of Mr. Wells and John leaving the boudoir. He must act quickly. Where can he hide this terrible slip of paper? The contents of the waste paper basket are kept and in any case are sure to be examined. There are no means of destroying it, and he dare not keep it. He looks round, and he sees, what do you think, mon ami? I shook my head. In a moment he has torn the letter into long, thin strips, and rolling them up into spills, he thrust them hurriedly in amongst the other spills in the vase on the mantelpiece. I uttered an exclamation. No one would think of looking there, Poirot continued, and he will be able at his leisure to come back and destroy this solitary piece of evidence against him. Then, all the time, it was in the spill vase in Mrs. Inglethorpe's bedroom, under our very noses? I cried. Poirot nodded. Yes, my friend, that is where I discovered my last link, and I owe that very fortunate discovery to you. To me? Yes. Do you remember telling me that my hand shook as I was straightening the ornaments on the mantelpiece? Yes, but I don't see. No, but I saw. Do you know, my friend, I remember that earlier in the morning, when we had been there together, I had straightened all the objects on the mantelpiece, and if they were already straightened, there would be no need to straighten them again, unless, in the meantime, someone else had touched them. Dear me, I murmured. So that is the explanation of your extraordinary behavior. You rushed down the stiles and found it still there? Yes, and it was a race for time. But I still can't understand why Inglethorpe was such a fool as to leave it there when he had plenty of opportunity to destroy it. Ah, but he had no opportunity. I saw to that. You, yes. Do you remember reproving me for taking the household into my confidence on the subject? Yes. Well, my friend, I saw there was just one chance. I was not sure then if Inglethorpe was the criminal or not. But if he was, I reasoned that he would not have the paper on him, but would have hidden it somewhere. And by enlisting the sympathy of the household, I could effectually prevent his destroying it. He was already under suspicion. And by making the matter public, I secured the services of about 10 amateur detectives, who would be watching him unceasingly. And being himself aware of their watchfulness, he would not dare seek further to destroy the document. He was therefore forced to depart from the house, leaving it in the spill vase. But surely Miss Howard had ample opportunities of aiding him. Yes, but Miss Howard did not know of the paper's existence. In accordance with their prearranged plan, she never spoke to Alfred Inglethorpe. They were supposed to be deadly enemies, and until John Cavendish was safely convicted, they neither of them dared risk a meeting. Of course, I had a watch kept on Mr. Inglethorpe, hoping that sooner or later he would lead me to the hiding place. But he was too clever to take any chances. The paper was safe where it was. Since no one had thought of looking there in the first week, it was not likely they would do so afterwards. But for your lucky remark, we might never have been able to bring him to justice. I understand that now. But when did you first begin to suspect Miss Howard? When I discovered that she had told a lie at the inquest about the letter she had received from Mrs. Inglethorpe. Why, what was there to lie about? You saw that letter? Do you recall its general appearance? Yes, more or less. You will recollect, then, that Mrs. Inglethorpe wrote a very distinctive hand, and left large clear spaces between her words. But if you look at the date at the top of the letter, you will notice that July 17th is quite different in this respect. Do you see what I mean? No, I confess I don't. You do not see that that letter was not written on the 17th, but on the 7th, the day after Miss Howard's departure. The one was written in before the 7th, to turn it into the 17th. But why? That is exactly what I asked myself. Why does Miss Howard suppress the letter written on the 17th and produce this faked one instead? Because she did not wish to show the letter of the 17th. Why again? And at once a suspicion dawned in my mind. You will remember my saying that it was wise to beware of people who were not telling you the truth. And yet, I cried indignantly. After that, you gave me 2 reasons why Miss Howard could not have committed the crime. And very good reasons, too, replied Poirot. For a long time they were a stumbling block to me until I remembered a very significant fact, that she and Alfred Inglethorpe were cousins. She could not have committed the crime single-handed. But the reasons against that did not debar her from being an accomplice. And then there was that rather over-vehement hatred of hers. It concealed a very opposite emotion. There was undoubtedly a tie of passion between them long before he came to Styles. They had already arranged their infamous plot that he should marry this rich, but rather foolish old lady, induce her to make a will leaving her money to him, and then gain their ends by a very cleverly conceived crime. If all had gone as they planned, they would probably have left England and lived together on their poor victim's money. They are a very astute and unscrupulous pair. While suspicion was to be directed against him, she would be making quiet preparations for a very different denouement. She arrives from Midlingham with all the compromising items in her possession. No suspicion attaches to her. No notice is paid to her coming and going in the house. She hides the strychnine and glasses in John's room. She puts the beard in the attic. She will see to it that sooner or later they are duly discovered. I don't quite see why they tried to fix the blame on John, I remarked. It would have been much easier for them to bring the crime home to Lawrence. Yes, but that was mere chance. All the evidence against him arose out of pure accident. It must, in fact, have been distinctly annoying to the pair of schemers. His manner was unfortunate, I observed thoughtfully. Yes. You realize, of course, what was at the back of that. No, you did not understand that he believed Mademoiselle Cynthia guilty of the crime? No, I exclaimed astonished. Impossible. Not at all. I myself nearly had the same idea. It was in my mind when I asked Mr. Wells that first question about the will. Then there were the bromide powders which she had made up, and her clever male impersonations, as Dorcas recounted them to us. There was really more evidence against her than anyone else. You are joking, Poirot. No. Shall I tell you what made Monsieur Lawrence turn so pale when he first entered his mother's room on the fatal night? It was because whilst his mother lay there obviously poisoned, he saw over your shoulder that the door into Mademoiselle Cynthia's room was unbolted. But he declared that he saw it bolted. I cried. Exactly, said Poirot dryly. And that was just what confirmed my suspicion that it was not. He was shielding Mademoiselle Cynthia. But why should he shield her? Because he is in love with her. I laughed. There, Poirot, you are quite wrong. I happen to know for a fact that, far from being in love with her, he positively dislikes her. Who told you that, mon ami? Cynthia herself. La pauvre petite. And she was concerned. She said that she did not mind at all. Then she certainly did mind very much, remarked Poirot. They are like that, les femmes. What you say about Lawrence is a great surprise to me, I said. But why? It was most obvious. Did not Monsieur Lawrence make the sour face every time Mademoiselle Cynthia spoke and laughed with his brother? He had taken it into his long head that Mademoiselle Cynthia was in love with Monsieur John. When he entered his mother's room and saw her obviously poisoned, he jumped to the conclusion that Mademoiselle Cynthia knew something about the matter. He was nearly driven desperate. First he crushed the coffee cup to powder under his feet, remembering that she had gone up with his mother the night before, and he determined that there should be no chance of testing its contents. Thenceforward, he strenuously and quite uselessly upheld the theory of death from natural causes. And what about the extra coffee cup? I was fairly certain that it was Mrs. Cavendish who had hidden it, but I had to make sure. Monsieur Lawrence did not know at all what I meant, but on reflection, he came to the conclusion that if he could find an extra coffee cup anywhere his lady love would be cleared of suspicion. And he was perfectly right. One thing more. What did Mrs. Inglethorpe mean by her dying words? They were, of course, an accusation against her husband. Dear me, Poirot, I said with a sigh. I think you have explained everything. I am glad it has all ended so happily. Even John and his wife are reconciled. Thanks to me. How do you mean, thanks to you? My dear friend, do you not realize that it was simply and solely the trial which has brought them together again? That John Cavendish still loved his wife, I was convinced. Also, that she was equally in love with him. But they had drifted very far apart. It all arose from a misunderstanding. She married him without love. He knew it. He is a sensitive man in his way. He would not force himself upon her if she did not want him. And as he withdrew, her love awoke. But they are both unusually proud, and their pride held them inexorably apart. He drifted into an entanglement with Mrs. Raikes, and she deliberately cultivated the friendship of Dr. Bauerstein. Do you remember the day of John Cavendish's arrest, when you found me deliberating over a big decision? Yes, I quite understood your distress. Pardon me, mon ami, but you did not understand it in the least. I was trying to decide whether or not I would clear John Cavendish at once. I could have cleared him, though it might have been a failure to convict the real criminals. They were entirely in the dark, as to my real attitude up to the very last moment, which partly accounts for my success. Do you mean that you could have saved John Cavendish from being brought to trial? Yes, my friend, but I eventually decided in favor of a woman's happiness. Nothing but the great danger through which they have passed could have brought these two proud souls together again. I looked at Poirot in silent amazement. The colossal cheek of the little man. Who on earth but Poirot would have thought of a trial for murder as a restorer of conjugal happiness? I perceive your thoughts, mon ami, said Poirot, smiling at me. No one but Hercule Poirot would have attempted such a thing, and you are wrong in condemning it. The happiness of one man and one woman is the greatest thing in all the world. His words took me back to earlier events. I remembered Mary as she lay white and exhausted on the sofa. Listening. There had come the sound of the bell below. She had started up. Poirot had opened the door, and meeting her agonized eyes, had nodded gently. Yes, madam, he said. I have brought him back to you. He had stood aside, and as I went out I had seen the look in Mary's eyes, as John Cavendish had caught his wife in his arms. Perhaps you are right, Poirot, I said gently. Yes, it is the greatest thing in the world. Suddenly, there was a tap at the door, and Cynthia peeped in. Come in, I said, springing up. She came in, but did not sit down. I only wanted to tell you something. Yes. Cynthia fidgeted with a little tassel for some moments, then suddenly exclaiming, You dears, kissed first me and then Poirot, and rushed out of the room again. What on earth does this mean? I asked, surprised. It was very nice to be kissed by Cynthia, but the publicity of the salute rather impaired the pleasure. It means that she has discovered Monsieur Lawrence does not dislike her as much as she thought, replied Poirot philosophically. But here he is. Lawrence at that moment passed the door. Monsieur Lawrence, called Poirot. We must congratulate you, is it not so? Lawrence blushed, and then smiled awkwardly. A man in love is a sorry spectacle. Now Cynthia had looked charming. I sighed. What is it, mon ami? Nothing, I said sadly. They are two delightful women. And neither of them is for you, finished Poirot. Never mind. Console yourself, my friend. We may hunt together again, who knows? And then...